Chapter 101. When Chu Qingyan walked out of the small alley, she didn't know which direction to go to find Xining and the others, but she heard someone loudly calling out her name. She turned around and saw Xiao Ran standing in the sea of people. He was dressed in a blue robe of good quality, which made his handsome face look even fairer and clearer. After not seeing him for so many days, this brat had grown quite a bit. Seeing him, she couldn't help thinking of the description of Baoyu in a famous book in high school. Face like the moon in mid-autumn, color like the flowers of spring, hair like a knife, eyebrows like ink, face like a peach petal, eyes like autumn waves. She sighed in her heart. When this person grows up, he will definitely be a young girl killer. Looking at him now, he already has the capital to bring disaster to others. When Xiao Ran saw that it was really her, he quickly walked over to her and put his hands on her shoulders. He carefully looked her up and down, and when he saw that she was fine, he heaved a sigh of relief. Chu Qingyan was confused by his strange appearance. What's wrong? Xiao Ran saw that she still had a blank and fearless appearance, so his face immediately became serious. He reprimanded her. Do you not bring your brain with you when you go out? Do you not know your own status? You came out to play and you didn't even let the guards follow you closely. If this prince didn't find you, where would you be wandering around? Her heart was already a bit shaken from being inexplicably held hostage, and now she was inexplicably angered by someone. Xiao Ran often brought up her low status to talk about things, so no matter how good Chu Qingyan's temper was, she couldn't handle what happened today. Her face immediately turned cold. If something happens to me, I don't need the fourth prince to worry. I know my own status, so there's no need for the prince to remind me again and again. Perhaps Chu Qingyan's tone was too harsh, but the moment she finished speaking, Xiao Ran, who was standing in front of her, was stunned. Chu Qingyan was vexed. It seemed like she had not cultivated well enough and could not hide her temper. Xiao Ran was also confused because of his concern. He also regretted that he didn't control his temper. Looking at the youth in front of him, his eyes were filled with self-blame. Don't be angry, I only said that because I was anxious. Don't take my words to heart. Chu Qingyan was about to apologize, but saw that he was a step ahead of her to reflect. Chu Qingyan suddenly felt a bit uncomfortable in her heart. She thought of the previous 2 times, Xiao Ran, as a Sichuan prince, would always inexplicably encounter some danger, so he was so cautious. It was because he treated her as a friend that he scolded her, worried that something would happen to her. Fourth prince, Qingyan is also wrong, please don't take it to heart. Seeing her soften her tone, Xiao Ran's heart relaxed. He waved his hand. Forget it, let's not talk about this. That's right, why are you here? If I didn't go to the king's palace and heard that you came out to play and wanted to try my luck to find you, but I met Xining and Huoling who were looking for you, I wouldn't have known that you were lost. Tell me, if I didn't find you first, wouldn't you be crying? Chu Qingyan rolled her eyes at him. Do you think I'm an idiot? If I can't find the way, I can't ask people. With a mouth under my nose, I could have found the king's palace by asking people. Who would be stupid enough to wait until the sky turned dark? Xiao Ran felt that she was right, so he ordered a servant to report his safety to Huoling and the others. Then he walked side by side with Chu Qingyan. Is there anywhere else you want to play? Xiao Ran looked at the bustling crowd and his interest was piqued. After experiencing everything that happened today, Chu Qingyan was no longer in the mood, but seeing Xiao Ran's excited face, she felt that it wouldn't be good to ruin his mood. After all, he had come here to find her. What about you? What do you want to play? Chu Qingyan tilted her head and asked him. Xiao Ran shook his head in a daze. Although I grew up in the capital, I am completely unfamiliar with this place because Imperial Mother never let me leave the palace to play. She said that the people outside are sinister. The few times I sneaked out was to find you and eldest brother in the king's palace to play. As for other places, I've heard of them, but I've never seen them before. Chu Qingyan suddenly felt that it wasn't that easy to be a prince. Xiao Ran and Xiao Su were also like this. One was like a golden canary that was locked up in a magnificent palace, and the other was exiled to fight on the battlefield since he was young. Thinking of this, she sent a look of sympathy to Xiao Ran, but she did not expect him to be sharp enough to notice it. He protested the entire way, "Take back your eyes like you're looking at a puppy. Otherwise, do you believe that I won't dig out your eyeballs and make them into skewers?" Chu Qingyan did not believe his outwardly strong words. She pointed at the Tanghulu skewers and asked, "Does the fourth prince want to eat that?" "What is that?" Xiao Ran's eyes were instantly attracted and he forgot what he wanted to say before. "Tanghulu, it's sweet and sour." Chu Qingyan did not forget to give it a little advertisement. "It looks pretty good. Xiang Yu, buy it for this prince." Xiao Ran immediately said to the servant beside him. "Yes." Xiang Yu immediately went to carry out the order. After a while, Chu Qingyan turned her head to look at Xiang Yu, who was carrying the Tanghulu skewers. She then looked at Xiao Ran, who was holding the Tanghulu skewers in his left hand and right hand. She suddenly felt like Granny Lu entering the Grand View Garden. Xiao Ran saw that she was looking at him and ordered Xiang Yu, "Pull one out and give it to Qingyan to eat." "Yes." Xiang Yu pulled one out from the straw skewers on her shoulder and handed it to Chu Qingyan. Chu Qingyan looked at the Tanghulu skewers in her hand and then looked at the strange gazes everyone was giving her. She suddenly felt like she couldn't eat anymore. She really was drunk. How was she supposed to go shopping while carrying such a large Tanghulu skewers? After strolling around the streets for nearly an hour, Ling had already brought people to pick her up. Thus, Xiao Ran reluctantly bid farewell to her with his mouth full of syrup. Chu Qingyan really wanted to pretend she didn't know this person. Wasn't it clearly said that this Xiao Ran was a young genius? Was it something that only appeared once in 100 years? Why was he like this in front of her? Were the rumors wrong? Was this the typical high IQ and low EQ? After waving her hand to send off Xiao Ran, Chu Qingyan and Ling returned to the king's palace. On the way back, Ling did not explain why he suddenly disappeared and she did not ask. Returning to her room, she comforted Xining, who was crying because she couldn't find her. Chu Qingyan thought about her experiences over the past few days. She didn't know what kind of disaster she had attracted recently. Every time she met someone, if they didn't want her to become a nun, they wanted her to become a maidservant. So, she decided that it was best if she didn't go out for the next few days. It was safer for her to be a beautiful woman and stay by the big ice cube's side. At least the cold air coming from the big ice cube's body was enough to make those demons and monsters retreat. However, there were some things that even if she didn't go out to look for them, they would still find her. For example, the sudden imperial edict. Shi Xian Emperor, who had nothing to do, suddenly wanted to see his little daughter-in-law. Chapter 102. After returning to the prince's residence, Chu Qingyan felt a little uneasy. She walked through the corridor and arrived at the study. The door was wide open, and she looked past the decorations to see the figure sitting behind the desk. She felt as if she had found someone to rely on and immediately walked towards him. Xiao Su heard her footsteps, but did not look up as he asked, "Did you get lost?" Chu Qingyan stopped in her tracks, and her expression was a little unnatural. This big ice cube is really annoying. His ability to tease people is really getting better with each passing day. "I'm not lost, I was just careless." Chu Qingyan thought for a long time, but did not know how to continue. Xiao Su smoothly helped her finish the sentence, "You were careless and lost all your servants. You really are capable." Chu Qingyan smiled embarrassedly and then walked to his side. She stretched her head to look at the book in his hand. It was a military book. She pursed her lips, "You always wake up early to go to court and come back to read and write. Don't you feel bored?" Xiao Su raised his eyebrows and looked at her, "That's how it feels in your eyes." Chu Qingyan ignored his teasing and leisurely wandered around the study. "Come here," Xiao Su suddenly said. What is it? Although Chu Qingyan asked, her body still walked over of its own accord. Pick one for yourself. Xiao Su looked at the stack of books on the table. Chu Qingyan did not know what he meant, but she still casually picked a book from the stack of books on the table. The three-character classic. She looked at the other books, Rules for Disciples, the Analects of Confucius, Mencius, what for? Chu Qingyan asked in confusion as she waved the book in her hand in front of him. Take a good look. Xiao Su saw that she had nothing to do all day and was afraid that she would not be able to accomplish anything if she continued like this. Because the books on his bookshelf were too profound, he was afraid that she would not be able to understand them. Thus, he had people search for suitable reading materials for children for her to read. You want me to learn this? Chu Qingyan found it hard to believe. You have a problem with that? Xiao Su asked. Chu Qingyan didn't dare to say anything after receiving his coercion. However, she had read the three-character classic since she was a child. The books on the table didn't give her any pressure at all, okay? But if she reported the truth, would she be treated as a monster by the ice cube? At this time, White Tiger walked in with two servants carrying a table and chair. After greeting his lord, White Tiger instructed the servants to set up the table and chair. Chu Qingyan stared dumbfoundedly at the table and chair that were one size smaller than Xiao Su's. She suddenly had a bad premonition. Was it too late for her to slip away now? Xiao Su glanced at her, and she stood at attention. From now on, you will study and learn how to write here. That one sentence determined her dark days in the future. Chu Qingyan wanted to cry, but no tears came out. She could only accept her fate. She couldn't run up to him and say that she had studied these books in high school. Xiao Su looked at her. She wanted to resist, but she did not dare to say anything. In the end, she just obediently read the book and smiled in satisfaction. At this time, Hualing and Turin walked in. However, when they saw Chu Qingyan sitting on the side, their expressions became a bit strange. Greetings to master. What is it? Xiao Su looked at his two subordinates in front of him while paying attention to her reading. Hualing looked at Chu Qingyan and was a bit hesitant. Xiao Su said indifferently, it's fine. Speak. Seeing that their master did not hide anything from Chu Qingyan, Hualing and Turin looked at each other. In the end, Hualing still took a step forward to report, Master, I saw black-clothed people on the streets of the eastern part of the city today. This subordinate followed them and after fighting with them, I discovered their martial arts and the assassins that chased after them. This subordinate believes that these people are in cahoots with the assassins that tried to assassinate the fourth prince. Moreover, this subordinate discovered that these people seem to come from a very hidden sect called the Moon Palace sect. It is also a sect that people in Jianghu talk about. This Moon Palace sect is very good at assassinations and poisons. They are highly respected by the royal families and even officials of various countries. They have always received commissions to take on assassination missions, but the price is very high. It is not something that normal people can afford. Moreover, the palace master of the Moon Palace sect rarely appears in the world. Even now, no one knows where this Moon Palace sect's stronghold is. Turin reported all the information he had received. Xiao Su's finger lightly tapped on the pages of the book. Since this Moon Palace sect has always been hidden and has appeared in the capital, they must have other movements. Continue to investigate and report to me if there is any new information. Yes. Turin and Hualing both responded. Xiao Su's gaze fell on Chu Qingyan as he lightly said to Hualing and Turin, if there is nothing else, you can leave. Turin and Hualing simultaneously glanced at Chu Qingyan, who was pretending to be seriously reading, before respectfully leaving. At birth, a man's nature is good. Their natures are similar, but their habits are different. If one does not teach, their nature will change. The way of teaching is to specialize. Hualing and Turin walked out of the study. The two of them were silent. In the end, Hualing spoke first, Turin, do you think that master cares too much about the little princess consort? You are not blind. Turin glanced at him. Ignoring the mockery in Turin's words, Hualing frowned and said, do you think it is good to continue like this? Turin looked at the sky. There were many white clouds. When a gust of wind blew, they began to float. No one knew where the clouds would drift to. I also do not know. If master does not want that position, then it is fine. I am just worried that if master ascends to that position in the future, she will not be able to help him at all. Turin said faintly. Big Ice Cube, I am hungry. Can I go eat dessert? You have only read a few pages. Continue. The people in the room started talking one after another. Turin and Hualing had complicated expressions. But now that she is here, master seems to be more humane. He no longer doesn't care about anything. Hualing said softly. Turin was silent. At this moment, White Tiger hurriedly walked towards the study. Is Lord in the study? White Tiger asked the two of them. Yes. Housekeeper, is there something urgent? Hualing replied. Someone from the palace is here. White Tiger knocked on the study door after speaking and went in to report. Chu Qingyan was still desperately reading. She knew that the big ice cube had gone out. When he came back, he told her to go back to her room to change clothes and prepare to enter the palace with him. Enter the palace? Chu Qingyan thought she heard wrong. Do you have a problem? Xiao Su gave her a cold look. Chu Qingyan suddenly had the impulse to beat her chest and stomp her feet. Wasn't everything fine? Why did she suddenly have to enter the palace? I suddenly got an illness that prevents me from entering the palace. Chu Qingyan grabbed the corner of the table and said pitifully. I will give you 15 minutes. Xiao Su ignored her cries and left her with this last sentence before stepping out of the room. The big ice cube was so cold-blooded. She really did not want to enter the palace. She subconsciously rejected it. But she still had to enter the palace. Chapter 103. Chu Qingyan looked up at the sky and let out a long sigh. She could only resign herself to her fate and change her clothes. Why did the Sichuan emperor not summon them earlier or later, but now of all times? Chu Qingyan looked at the sky. Could it be that he wanted to invite her and the big ice cube to dinner? With this thought in mind, she changed her clothes and got on the carriage to enter the palace. Big Ice Cube, do you think His Majesty summoned us for something? Chu Qingyan couldn't hold back her curiosity and raised her head to ask the person who was resting with his eyes closed. Xiao Su calmly replied, this prince isn't sure either. Big Ice Cube, then tell me, what kind of person is your imperial father? Is he easy to get along with? What should I say and what shouldn't I say when I go? Chu Qingyan suddenly felt nervous. She realized that she was about to meet the person who held the highest authority in the Xixian nation, the person who held absolute power over her life and death. Emperors only existed in history books and on television screens. She had never thought that she would have the chance to meet a living person like this one day. However, Chu Qingyan, who was immersed in her own emotions, didn't notice that Xiao Su's expression changed slightly after she asked. What kind of person? In reality, he didn't know either. After he turned 10, his impression of his imperial father had become fainter and fainter. Whether his imperial father had ever praised him, affirmed him, or shown him a smile, he had already forgotten all of it. Or rather, he didn't have the heart to remember it, and it was subsequently forgotten in the depths of his memory. It wasn't until the young girl in front of him blinked her large eyes that he pulled himself out of his thoughts. The less you say, the less you make mistakes. It's good that you don't do anything. Chu Qingyan was stunned. Was this how the big ice cube handled things? But when she stared at Xiao Su, she discovered a different kind of emotion surging in his eyes. It wasn't as cold as usual, and there was a hint of melancholy. Her heart couldn't help but clench. She moved closer and carefully asked, Big Ice Cube, what's wrong? Did I say something wrong? Xiao Su lowered his head and looked into her eyes. They were clean and clear, like a curved stream, so clear that he could see the bottom. The strange grief in his heart slowly dissipated in her stream. He raised his hand and stroked her head, sighing softly. So, the less you say, the less mistakes you make. Tisk. Chu Qingyan immediately turned her face away. Big Ice Cube must be teasing her. Xiao Su curled his lips and his mood improved for no reason. However, this girl seemed to be becoming more and more open with him. Was this a good thing or a bad thing? Xiao Su was a little puzzled. At this time, the carriage suddenly stopped moving forward. Chu Qingyan immediately looked at Xiao Su. Gu Yi's voice came from outside the carriage, "Lord, it's the second prince." The second prince? Xiao Yao. That dissolute and unrestrained prince? Chu Qingyan's mind instantly flashed with the image of a dispirited man with green eyes who indulged in sensual pleasures. It was said that this second prince did not love his country, but loved beauties. Therefore, Chu Qingyan was very curious about this second prince who was rumored to be excessively licentious. "Amen," Xiao Su calmly replied. Thus, the carriage's curtains were pulled up from the outside. Chu Qingyan sat inside the carriage and opened her eyes wide to look around. She wanted to see this famous second prince. "I say, eldest brother, you're really not a good friend. You've been back for so long. I asked you to come to my residence for a visit, but you refused. You've really made this subject brother very sad." Before Chu Qingyan could see anyone, she heard a leisurely and casual voice coming from the side of the carriage. Just by listening to this voice, it was clear and bright but also free and easy. It was hard to associate this voice with the rumored licentious second prince. As soon as the voice fell, the person riding the horse also arrived in front of the carriage. The person was dressed in a green robe, his black hair held up high by a golden hairpin. The front of his robe was slightly open, revealing his exquisite collarbone. He was leaning against the back of the horse with a relaxed expression. Only when he looked at Xiao Su did he become alert. What a dissolute and unrestrained man. The smell in your residence isn't good. Xiao Su did not give him any face and directly replied. Xiao Yao was stunned at first, but then he understood the meaning behind his words. He couldn't help but laugh loudly. "Eldest brother, what's wrong with the smell of those rouge powders? They're soft and tender and alluring, with cherry lips and willow waists. They're fat and thin. They have a unique taste." Speaking up to hear, Xiao Yao seemed to have thought of something and smiled at him. "That's right. Eldest brother has never liked those vulgar powders. How about this subject brother? Wait for the next time I come across a peerless beauty and invite the eldest brother to my residence for a chat." Xiao Su coldly looked at him. "Just mind your own business. Ben Wang doesn't need it." Chu Qingyan looked in disbelief at the person in front of her. He could actually say such things in front of so many people. It really was as the rumors said, indulging in sensual pleasures. But it was a pity that such a good body was wasted. But Chu Qingyan looked at this person. Even though his words were full of laughter, his eyes were very bright. She faintly felt that this person was not as he appeared on the surface. "Eldest brother really hasn't changed at all," Xiao Yao said uninterestedly. Then he thought of something and poked his head into the carriage to look. "Right, I heard that you are very fond of that little princess. Have her come out for me to see if she's a feast for the eyes." Xiao Su raised his eyes to look at him. "Stop before you go too far." Xiao Yao suddenly shivered. Eldest brother's eyes seemed to have frozen. It really was frightening. He did not go any further. He stroked the horse's mane with one hand, his expression still mischievous. "I heard that today, that person mentioned your little princess in Fu Huang's ears, so Fu Huang had a sudden impulse to bring you to see her." Xiao Su did not respond, but it was clear that he had heard it. "All right, the night of spring is short. Chen Di still has to go see the beauties. I wish you a safe journey. Xiao Yao leisurely waved his hand at them. Then he raised his whip and leisurely led his attendants away. Who was that person? Why did Xiao Yao not point it out? Why did he wish them a safe journey when they were just going into the palace? Also, his seemingly casual words were not really casual. Chu Qingyan did not know what Xiao Yao's words meant, but there seemed to be a hidden meaning. Because she saw that after the big ice block heard those words, he became silent. Chu Qingyan tugged at his sleeve, wanting to ask him about it. It's fine. Xiao Su patted the back of her hand and then ordered the carriage to continue forward. The curtain of the carriage fell and covered the light of the setting sun. Chu Qingyan looked thoughtfully at the person in front of her and then suddenly spoke. After I enter the palace, I will definitely listen to you. If no one asks, I will not speak. I will be careful and will not cause trouble for you. Xiao Su heard this and looked at her. He saw the seriousness on her little face and knew that she had guessed something from Xiao Yao's words. He suddenly smiled and raised a hand to touch her face. No need. If there is a problem, Ben Wang will take care of it. His fingers were slightly rough as they caressed her cheeks. He quickly withdrew his hand, but the gentleness didn't immediately disappear from her cheeks. Only then did she realize that she seemed to have been taken advantage of just now. And it was the big ice block. It really was too surprising. But when the big ice block smiled, his eyes were very beautiful. It was a pity that his face was covered by the mask and she could not see his face. She was not happy. Chapter 104. After another quarter of an hour, they arrived at the palace gates. Chu Qingyan got off the carriage and looked at the towering palace walls. She couldn't help but sigh at Big Ice Cube. This was the first time she had seen such a tall wall in her life. Xiao Su's face darkened when he heard this. He grabbed her collar and walked into the palace. Chu Qingyan didn't know that his face would change so quickly. She must have been seeing things when he was so gentle in the carriage just now. After entering the palace, there was a wide road paved with green bricks. Along the way, there were guards every 5 steps and a small imperial guard every 10 steps. There were no flowers or trees, only cold armor. Chu Qingyan looked at the heavily guarded palace and sighed inwardly. As expected, this was the most important place in the country. Even a fly couldn't get in. But she quickly looked away and warned herself that from the moment she entered the palace gates, she had to be careful with her words and actions. Therefore, she couldn't look around right now. Big Ice Cube's status in the imperial family was already a bit delicate. Now, she couldn't bring trouble to him. After passing through a place that looked like a square and passing through a corridor, there was a eunuch waiting there to lead the way. Greetings to His Royal Highness. An old eunuch without a beard bowed to Xiao Su. Looking at his attire, he should be a eunuch with some status in the palace. Eunuch Chao, sorry to trouble you to wait, Xiao Su said lightly. I don't dare. Eunuch Chao turned to look at Chu Qingyan with a smile and then asked, this is the 9th young miss of the Chu family? She's so smart and cute. Originally, he wanted to say that he and Prince Ing were a match made in heaven, but looking at their height and age, no matter how eloquent he was, he didn't dare to say it out loud. Xiao Su said to Chu Qingyan, this is Imperial Father's favorite, Eunuch Chao. Chu Qingyan obediently bowed. Hello, Eunuch Chao. This servant doesn't deserve such praise. Eunuch Chao hurriedly avoided Chu Qingyan's bow. He originally thought that since Chu Qingyan was only a 10-year-old child from the countryside, her words and actions would not be presentable. However, when he saw her standing beside the King of England, looking straight ahead with a slight and well-behaved smile on her face, if he did not know the inside story, he would have thought that she was a young lady from an aristocratic family. However, he had to admit that this Chu Qingyan's appearance was outstanding. At least among these aristocratic families, she could be said to be one of the best. Let's go. Xiao Su didn't like small talk, so he said coldly. This servant is confused. His Majesty should be anxious from waiting. Please follow this servant. Eunuch Chao bowed and raised his hand to point in the direction. Xiao Su then led Chu Qingyan forward in large strides. The vermilion pillars of the palace seemed to extend forward without end, passing through the walkway. They turned and walked onto the white arch bridge. What entered their sight was a long corridor built on the surface of the water. Rippling waves of the lake surrounded the bottom. Fields of lotus leaves, either in clusters or in large patches, made the entire lake exuberant because of the greenery. From afar, they could see the palace hidden in the green leaves. The corridors were winding, the eaves were high, each hugging the terrain and fighting against each other. Chu Qingyan felt a kind of oppressive atmosphere and sternness coming towards her. It wasn't until they stopped in front of the main hall that Eunuch Chao bowed and said, "Masters, please wait a moment. This servant will go and report." Xiao Su nodded slightly. After Eunuch Chao left, Chu Qingyan finally dared to size up the surrounding buildings. Dignified halls rose and fell one after another, closely intertwined like fish scales. And the high hall in front of her seemed to be the core of all the halls. It was clustered around, and the glittering golden glazed tiles all revealed its nobility and majesty. Imperial Study. The 3 large words were written in thick ink on a red plaque with golden patterns on the edges. It was noble and dignified. And under each pillar, there was an imperial guard with a blade standing there expressionlessly. The security was very tight. After a while, Eunuch Chao came out. However, Chu Qingyan noticed that his expression was unnatural. She couldn't help but be curious. Could it be that the Sichuan emperor didn't want to see them? Reporting to His Royal Highness, His Majesty is currently testing the 4th prince's homework. Please wait here for a moment. Eunuch Chao revealed a troubled expression. It's fine. We'll wait. Xiao Su didn't seem to care at all. Eunuch Chao bowed to them and entered the palace. This wait lasted for an hour. The sky was getting dark, and the afterglow of the setting sun was about to cover the mountaintop. At this time, Chu Qingyan began to feel a little strange. Xiao Su was the first prince and the eldest son of the first wife. He should be treated well. Why did he have to wait outside the palace after hearing the order to rush over? Big ice block, how long do we have to wait? Chu Qingyan raised her head and asked. Xiao Su lowered his head and said indifferently, tired of waiting. No, I just don't know how long we have to wait. Waiting was sometimes a kind of enjoyment, but waiting for an unknown amount of time was something that would end. Moreover, she had to continue waiting. It was inevitable that her heart would feel a little hopeless. Seeing her rubbing her hands, Xiao Su asked in a rare attentive manner, "Are you cold?" "No." Chu Qingyan nodded with an embarrassed smile. Actually, she didn't want to admit it, but she didn't know that her body was so honest. Although it was midsummer, the wind in the palace was colder than outside. She didn't know if it was proof, but the palaces of each dynasty were built on yellow earth and white bones. Those unwilling souls would occasionally blow the eerie wind in any corner of the palace. Xiao Su saw that she didn't mean what she said. He couldn't help but laugh and reached out to hold her small hand. Chu Qingyan didn't know what he wanted to do. His body temperature was clearly lower than hers. Could it be that he wanted to use poison to fight poison, to use ice to cure ice? Chu Qingyan was amused by the random thoughts in her mind. It was also at this time that a warm current flowed from her palm into her blood. It then circulated throughout her body, warming up her veins and making her entire body feel warm. Chu Qingyan felt like she was soaking in a hot spring. She was like a satisfied kitten. She narrowed her eyes and sighed as she asked, "Is this internal strength? It can kill enemies and keep out the cold." Emotions were contagious, especially when the small hand in his palm was tightly holding onto his fingers, as if he was her support. Xiao Su's voice also became gentle. "Big ice cube, teach me in the future." Chu Qingyan felt that if she knew martial arts, she would be able to protect herself in the future. Moreover, she would be able to keep warm. Xiao Su seemed to have seen through her thoughts and poured cold water on her. If you can wake up at 3 in the morning, train for at least 6 hours a day, and persevere through the harsh winter and scorching summer, then this prince will consider teaching you. 3 in the morning. Converted to modern time, wouldn't that mean waking up at 4 or 5 in the morning? Training for at least 6 hours a day. Once she thought of being exposed to the scorching sun during the summer and her hands freezing in the cold wind during the winter, she immediately shook her head like a rattle drum. Xiao Su already knew that she would have this reaction. She was used to being a lazy cat. She would even cry when asked to read a book, so how could she suddenly become diligent? 3 feet of ice was not formed in a single day. If you want to learn, you have to persevere. As for you, in this king's opinion, it will be very difficult. Chu Qingyan puffed up her cheeks. She really wanted to nod and agree that she could do it. But once she thought of the consequences of being impulsive, she immediately stopped that thought. If she spoke too fast, the one who would suffer in the end would be herself. Xiao Su saw that she reacted and couldn't help feeling that it was a pity. He wanted to stimulate her. If she could really learn some martial arts, then that would be good. Big Ice Cube, why do you think His Majesty still hasn't summoned us? It was almost time for dinner. Impatient? He asked. Would you? She asked. Used to it. He lightly replied. Used to it. Chu Qingyan unconsciously looked at him. Was he used to waiting, or was he used to being left out like this? Was it because this kind of thing happened too often, so he was used to it? Chu Qingyan didn't know why, but a corner of her heart ached. Chapter 105. Chu Qingyan reflexively tightened her grip on his hand. Xiao Su could feel the strength in her small hand and couldn't help but lower his head in question with his eyes. He saw that her eyes were filled with the afterglow of the setting sun, gentle and warm. It doesn't matter. In the future, I'll wait with you. It's too lonely to be alone. 2 people can talk. Xiao Su was slightly startled. Then he raised his hand and placed it on her head. The hair under his hand was as soft as silk. He only quietly stroked it without speaking. Chu Qingyan also didn't speak for once. She silently gazed at the palace door in front of her. Suddenly, she heard the sound of the palace door being pulled open. Then she saw a youth dressed in a pure white round-collared silk robe being respectfully escorted out of the palace door by palace servants. Xiao Ran. In the imperial palace, Xiao Ran's brocade robes were exquisite and magnificent, different from the simple and noble aura he wore outside the palace. Xiao Ran clearly saw the person outside the palace. His serious little face instantly bloomed with a smile. He quickly walked over, but when he saw the 2 hands clasped together and his eldest brother intimately placing his hand on Chu Qingyan's head, he suddenly felt uncomfortable. He had never experienced this kind of feeling before. The smile on his face instantly froze. At this time, Eunuch Chao also came out of the palace door. He bowed and smiled at the 2 people who had been waiting for a long time. His Majesty invites you in. Xiao Su nodded at his 4th brother who was walking over. Chu Qingyan's heart was in her throat because of the Sichuan Emperor's summons, so the 2 of them didn't notice that something was wrong with Xiao Ran. Xiao Ran turned around and watched the 2 of them walk into the palace side by side. Only when the palace door closed did he come back to his senses. He clenched his fists in self-abandonment. What was wrong with him just now? After entering the palace, Chu Qingyan secretly looked around. There was a silver-gilded incense burner, which was as tall as a person, leaning against the corner, emitting incense. The 4-sheep square was placed on the table, and the Changxin Palace lantern was hanging high. Under the light of the lantern, the finely polished jade horn cup shone with a gentle and tranquil luster, like a magnificent work of art. No matter which corner it was, it showed a noble style. Greetings, Imperial Father. Xiao Su knelt down with Chu Qingyan. Greetings, Your Majesty, she said respectfully beside him. Have you been waiting for a long time? A voice came from ahead. Although he said this, Chu Qingyan didn't hear the slightest bit of apology in his voice. She raised her head and saw a man wearing a golden crown. He wore a bright yellow robe with large sleeves, and a yellow sleeveless robe with a curved collar. The collar and sleeves were decorated with golden embroidery, and the two shoulders were embroidered with dragon patterns. He sat upright on the dragon throne, dignified and incomparably noble. Chu Qingyan focused her eyes and saw the Sichuan emperor's appearance. He had a high nose bridge, thick ears, a tall and sturdy figure, and sword-like eyebrows and tiger-like eyes. The appearance of an emperor was obvious. Not bad. While secretly sizing him up, Chu Qingyan heard the person beside her calmly reply. This is the girl of the Chu clan. The Sichuan emperor turned to look at Chu Qingyan, who was slowly getting up, and raised his eyebrows slightly. Yes, Xiao Su replied. Raise your head and let Zhen have a look. The Sichuan emperor ordered Chu Qingyan. Chu Qingyan obediently replied, yes, and then raised her head. The West Xian emperor had seen countless people, and when he saw Chu Qingyan's delicate features, he knew that she would definitely become a beauty in the future. The West Xian emperor couldn't help but frown. However, when he thought about her lowly status, he smiled again and said insincerely, not bad, not bad. Your emperor grandfather has a good eye for women. Chu Qingyan's mouth twitched. This person in power really knew how to talk nonsense. The Emperor Emeritus hadn't even seen her before, so how could he say that he had a unique eye for a wife? Wasn't he just lying through his teeth? Many thanks to Imperial Grandfather and Imperial Father for your love. Xiao Su replied calmly. Although Qingyan is young, you still have to take care of her. Don't only care about yourself and play with swords all day long. I don't even know what you're blindly busy with. The Sichuan emperor said indifferently. Chu Qingyan couldn't help but sneer. Although the Sichuan emperor said that he wanted Xiao Su to take care of her, his words were actually mocking him. She didn't understand how the Sichuan emperor saw that Xiao Su was blindly busy. Haven't I been ordered around by you all day long? She felt a little indignant on behalf of Xiao Su, but his status was there. If he was right, then he was right. If he was wrong, then he was right. Xiao Su's eyes darkened. I understand. After teaching Xiao Su a lesson, the Sichuan emperor turned his attention to Chu Qingyan. I heard that Ranner has been getting along well with you recently. Chu Qingyan wasn't prepared for the Sichuan emperor's question. She was a little startled, but her thoughts quickly connected the dots. She immediately replied, the fourth prince is very approachable. He gets along well with the people in the King of England's residence. The Sichuan emperor finally looked at Chu Qingyan. She actually understood the meaning behind his words. He didn't know if she was really smart or if she had just answered by accident. The Sichuan emperor didn't answer Chu Qingyan. Instead, he looked at Xiao Su. Your fourth brother's homework has been tight recently. If there's nothing to do, don't let him play at your place. It's not worth it if his studies are delayed. Chu Qingyan was about to explode. Which eye of yours saw the big ice cube let your precious fourth prince come to the residence? It's clearly his favorite, okay? Don't confuse right and wrong, okay? The younger generation doesn't like you when you act like this, okay? Chu Qingyan suspected that this old man didn't want to see her at all. He just wanted to use this opportunity to teach her and the big ice cube a lesson. She didn't mind, but she didn't know that the big ice cube's heart. I will pass on your message, Xiao Su replied methodically. The Sichuan emperor choked. He knew that he had already taught him enough lessons tonight, so he suppressed his anger and didn't continue. Then, the two of them started asking questions and answering questions. Chu Qingyan was stunned. The way this father and son interacted with each other was worse than the way a small family interacted with each other. The Sichuan emperor was neither cold nor warm, while Xiao Su replied in a businesslike manner. Was this the kinship of the imperial family? But didn't she hear the occasional laughter of Xiao Ran and the Sichuan emperor outside the hall just now? Could it be that the rumors were true? That Xiao Su lost his favor because his face was disfigured. However, the Xixian emperor quickly turned his attention to the affairs of the imperial court, and the two of them began to discuss the autumn examination. Chu Qingyan's gaze fell on the two of them. If she didn't know that they were father and son, she might have thought that they were just superior and subordinate. Chu Qingyan quietly played the role of a beautiful young girl for an hour. In the end, the Sichuan emperor's cold and sharp gaze fell on the two of them. Your imperial mother probably hasn't seen Qingyan before. Bring her to see her. As soon as the Sichuan emperor finished speaking, Chu Qingyan saw Xiao Su's lips twitch imperceptibly. She suddenly had a bad feeling about Empress Liang, who she had only heard of but never seen. After leaving the palace, Chu Qingyan raised her head and looked hesitantly at the person beside her. Big Ice Cube, will your imperial mother dislike me? She knew that Empress Liang came from the left prime minister's family and should have high expectations for her son's wife. Don't worry about it, Xiao Su said coldly. That meant that she didn't like her, and she didn't like her very much? Chu Qingyan suddenly had a bad feeling about this meeting. Chapter 106. Eldest brother, Qingyan. Chu Qingyan's thoughts were interrupted by this shout. Turning her head, she saw Xiao Ran standing in the corridor, looking at her with bright eyes. Fourth Imperial Prince. Chu Qingyan curtsied towards him. Originally, the two of them did not have such formalities in the prince's residence. However, she had just been warned by Sichuan emperor not to lead his precious son astray, so she had learned to be careful. After all, this was the imperial palace, and Sichuan emperor's spies were everywhere. Xiao Ran had already seen the two of them when they walked out of the hall. However, the two of them seemed to be immersed in their own world, and a third person could not enter. At this time, Chu Qingyan's distant and polite appearance made him feel that he was even further away from her. This made him feel even more uncomfortable. Eldest brother, you probably haven't eaten yet, right? Why don't you come to this subject brother's palace to eat together? Xiao Ran approached the two, wanting to use the distance between them to close the gap. Xiao Su said indifferently, no need. Imperial father just finished teaching you. Go back and rest early. We still have to make a trip to Chaoyang Palace. Xiao Ran looked at Chu Qingyan. The latter smiled and nodded at him, but her smile was still faintly distant. Xiao Ran was a bit disappointed. In the end, he reluctantly agreed, then this subject brother will go back first. If there is anything, you can summon a palace maid to find this subject brother. Xiao Su nodded, then turned and left with Chu Qingyan. Xiao Ran looked at the two's backs. Something seemed to melt in the depths of his heart. It was a bit sour. Xiang Yu. This subordinate is here. I seem to be sick. This subordinate will report to Consort Yu right now and send someone to summon a grand physician. No need. Perhaps it's a mental illness. I don't understand it, but it's not a physical illness. Xiang Yu looked at His Highness with a puzzled expression. His Highness had always been full of confidence, but for some reason today, it was tainted with melancholy. The 12-year-old Xiao Ran didn't know what it was like to be in love, but he had already started to worry. The silhouettes of the two people on the ground seemed to be snuggling up to each other intimately. Chu Qingyan felt even more uncertain after hearing Big Ice Cube's words. Halfway there, she suddenly tugged at the sleeves hanging down by her side. Big Ice Cube, it's so late. Why don't we go back first and find time to visit your mother next time? You can escape now, but you can't escape forever. Xiao Su saw through her thoughts and directly exposed her. This prince never knew that you were a coward. Oh ho, he's actually trying to goad me. Chu Qingyan couldn't help but look down on him in her heart. He really treated her like a 10-year-old child. However, she had to admit that he wasn't wrong. An ugly daughter-in-law would have to meet her parents-in-law eventually. If it wasn't today, it would be tomorrow. How big of a difference could there be? However, she was a bit resistant right now. She had a feeling that something would happen in the palace tonight. She wanted to quickly leave this troublesome place. But I'm hungry, Chu Qingyan said in a pitiful manner. Endure it. Xiao Su's reply floated down. I'm still cold, Chu Qingyan said in a huff. Endure it. He still replied in a lukewarm manner. I don't have the strength to walk. She might as well go all out. Tonight, she had made up her mind not to go. She clearly knew that there was danger, so why would she walk right into the trap? Her sixth sense had always been very accurate. Moreover, she hadn't eaten anything the entire afternoon and wasn't wearing much clothes. She was truly cold, hungry, and had no strength. Endure it. This time, Xiao Su's voice had a trace of helplessness and a faint smile in it. Chu Qingyan blinked. Did she hear wrong? Just as she was about to raise her head to look at him, a hand took hold of her little hand and wrapped it in his. A familiar warmth flowed from his skin into her meridians. She knew that big ice cube was using his internal energy to warm her up again. Don't worry, with this king here, I will definitely protect you. In the cool night, the palace was very quiet. The ice-cold armor passed in front of her, making it look very tight. The wide tiles stretched out endlessly and the moonlight shined down on them, reflecting a faint green glow on the ground. In Chu Qingyan's eyes, the entire palace was terrifyingly unfamiliar. But when she looked up into those eyes that were more dazzling than the stars, she felt like the darkness around her had been lit up. Protect me. Then can I believe you? All right. Chu Qingyan seriously nodded. She never easily trusted people. Her heart's wall of self-protection was too strong and she rarely opened it to others, but it was like she had been bewitched by this cold voice, so she was willing to believe him. Xiao Su did not know what this "all right" meant, but seeing her serious reply, he couldn't help rubbing her hair before leading her to the main hall of Chaoyang Palace. Chu Qingyan almost exploded. She really wasn't a pet cat. Don't keep rubbing her head. Depressed. When the two of them arrived at the gates of Chaoyang Palace, Chu Qingyan looked up at the magnificent gates and felt like she was going blind. Was this the gold of the rich? No wonder it was where the master of the harem lived. The palace maid standing at the gates welcomed the two of them in. When they arrived at the gates of the inner hall, Luo Yun was already standing there. She leaned slightly to greet Xiao Su, greetings to His Royal Highness. No need for formalities. Xiao Su raised his hand and then asked, is my muhu resting? Luo Yun glanced at Chu Qingyan who was silently standing next to His Highness and then said, the Empress knew that your Highness was coming and was originally very happy, but when she heard that you brought. Luo Yun paused and then continued with tacit understanding, so the Empress said to ask you to go back. She doesn't want to see other people. When Chu Qingyan heard this, she wanted to laugh. She felt that power, status, and wealth were sometimes very important. It was so important that people could immediately judge the likability of people they had never met. It was very unfortunate that she had been slapped to death on the beach at the first opportunity. And the palace maids had purposely ignored her. But the slight tightening of her hand made her smile knowingly. Xiao Su frowned. His muhu never left any leeway when she spoke, so he said without hesitation, then this Wang will bring Qingyan to see you another time. Luo Yun stilled. She thought that the Empress' meaning was clear enough, but she didn't think that Xiao Su would still do as he pleased and bring Chu Qingyan to see Nyang Nyang at another time. It was during this time that Xiao Su led Chu Qingyan out of Chaoyang Palace without hesitation. The journey was silent. Xiao Su wasn't used to her silence. Angry? Hearing this, Chu Qingyan pulled herself out of her thoughts and said mischievously, "If I say I'm angry, what will you do? If I say I'm not angry, what will you do? If you're angry, endure it. If you're not angry, it's fine." Chu Qingyan couldn't help being amused. She pretended to be angry as she said, "Hey, I'm at a disadvantage like this. You don't know how to comfort people at all. Isn't this Wang by your side the best comfort?" A tone that said, "Don't you dare say no." Chu Qingyan couldn't help laughing. It was like the big ice block had been dyed with smoke and fire by her. Just as she was about to say something, a eunuch walked over. "Greetings to His Royal Highness. Her Highness Consort Yu invites you in." Chapter 107. Her Highness Consort Yu. Chu Qingyan subconsciously looked towards Xiao Su. Wasn't this Xiao Ran's mother? Why did she suddenly summon them? What did Consort Yu say? Xiao Su couldn't help but frown. Her Highness heard that His Royal Highness brought Miss Chu into the palace, so she wants to see her. The eunuch respectfully replied. Xiao Su's eyes were a bit cold. "Lead the way." "Yes, this way please." The eunuch immediately stepped aside, then bent down and pointed towards the main road behind him. Chu Qingyan followed Xiao Su and slowly walked in the opposite direction of where they came from. The bad feeling in her heart grew stronger and stronger. She couldn't help but suspect that her sixth sense came from Consort Yu, who she had never met before, and not from Empress Liang, who had rejected them at the door. "If you're hungry, endure it for now. When we go back, I'll have Huang Yi prepare your favorite dishes." Xiao Su noticed that the expression of the person beside him was a bit ugly. He knew that she was already impatient and wanted to leave the palace, so he couldn't help but comfort her. As soon as Xiao Su spoke, the eunuch leading the way felt a chill run down his spine. Did he mishear? Did that gentle voice just now come from the mouth of Sichuan's coldest and most ruthless lord? Was he hearing things? Chu Qingyan shook her head. Just now, the big ice cube had promised to protect her. She had always doubted people and never doubted people. The big ice cube gave her a strong sense of security that made her believe him without a doubt. "When I go back, I can eat many bowls of rice. I want to have Huang Yi make braised lion's head, spicy chicken wings, jade hibiscus soup, swallow grass biscuits. No, if I keep talking, I'll be even hungrier." Chu Qingyan smacked her lips. She was really making things difficult for herself. Xiao Su's originally cold eyes were dyed with a slightly warm light because of her muttering to herself. "Okay, as you wish." Chu Qingyan raised her head and smiled at him. At this time, the two of them had already passed through several palaces until they reached a sparkling and translucent palace. Compared to the magnificent and domineering Zhaoyang Palace they had seen before, this Yu Palace seemed small, but every building was very exquisite. The palace maids guarding the entrance of the hall seemed to have received instructions. When they arrived at the entrance, they opened the door and welcomed them in. When they were outside, Chu Qingyan had already let go of Xiao Su's hand. She followed closely behind Xiao Su, cautiously and curiously observing their surroundings. It had to be said that this Consort Yu really knew how to live her life. Along the way, peony flowers paved the way on both sides and the front was covered by laurel trees. Only after they had passed through the trees could they see the palace behind the shade of the trees. The glazed tiles sparkled under the setting sun, sparkling and translucent. It had to be said that if one had not seen Zhaoyang Palace before, they would definitely think that this was the main palace of the harem. Xiao Su greets Consort Yu Nyang Nyang. When the large ice cube's calm voice sounded in her ears, Chu Qingyan finally saw the person sitting on the chaise lounge in front of her. Her eyes were like crescent moons. She was delicate and beautiful, and her skin was white like cream. Her hair was combed into a cloud and there was a jade peony hairpin in her hair. Although she was over 30 years old, she looked like she was in her 20s. It was no wonder that this person was known as the world's #1 beauty. Fu Yuyue, Consort Yu, who was doted on by 3,000 people. Chu Qingyan curtsied towards her. Consort Yu Nyang Nyang, may I wish you good luck. Su, is too polite. Is this the Chu family's little girl? She really looks like the water spirit. Consort Yu had already noticed Chu Qingyan when she entered the hall. Although she was young, her eyes were like water. Although she was young, her beauty had already begun to show. This made Consort Yu jealous. If she was 10 years younger, her skin would definitely be more lustrous and white than it was now. Perhaps it was because women understood women. When Consort Yu said this, Chu Qingyan clearly felt a chill run down her spine. Consort Yu Nyang Nyang, this little girl is the Chu family's Qingyan. Consort Yu is worthy of being called the world's #1 beauty. Even Qingyan does not dare to raise her head and blaspheme your face. Chu Qingyan gracefully stepped forward and introduced herself. Since the big ice cube had already said that he would protect her, then she had nothing to be afraid of. She might as well be a little more generous and avoid being criticized. When Consort Yu heard Chu Qingyan's words, she felt much happier. Who didn't like to hear praise? Moreover, it came from a 10-year-old child. She was young and not good at lying, so this proved that she was more sincere than those bootlickers. As a result, Consort Yu's brows relaxed slightly. This little imp is quite clever. What a sweet mouth. Hurry and sit down. Try these bayberries that were sent from outside the palace and see if they're sweet. As Consort Yu spoke, she gestured for the two of them to sit down. Then, a palace maid quickly brought over tea. Su, this consort heard that you brought Qingyan into the palace. This consort thought that if we missed this opportunity, it would be a long time before we could see Qingyan again. Thus, this consort summoned the two of you. I hope this didn't cause you any trouble. Consort Yu smiled as she spoke to Xiao Su. No. Xiao Su took a sip of tea and said indifferently. Perhaps it was because Xiao Su was always this cold and cheerless in front of them, so Consort Yu wasn't dissatisfied. She turned to Chu Qingyan and said, Qingyan, you're still young and don't understand many things. I don't think you've heard of the rules of the palace. If you have any questions in the future, you can come to the palace to find this consort. Chu Qingyan felt a little funny. Although Empress Liang didn't like her, when it came to teaching, it shouldn't be her turn. However, Chu Qingyan still agreed. Thank you, Consort Yu. Qingyan will remember this. Truly obedient and clever. A few days ago, this consort had the Ministry of Internal Affairs prepare a few sets of clothes suitable for you. This consort originally wanted to have someone send them to the King of England's Fu. Since you're here today, you can try them on. If they don't fit, this consort can have the Ministry of Internal Affairs directly change them. As she spoke, Consort Yu stood and pulled on Chu Qingyan's hand. She turned towards Xiao Su with a radiant smile and said, Su, I'll borrow your little princess. I'll return her to you later. Xiao Su glanced at Chu Qingyan. Chu Qingyan bit her lower lip and nodded at him. Although Xiao Su was a bit worried, he still nodded at Consort Yu. Thus, Consort Yu pulled her into the inner hall. Chu Qingyan obediently followed. Chu Qingyan thought that in the inner hall, this Consort Yu probably wouldn't so brazenly play any tricks. But when the palace maid handed over the clothes, Chu Qingyan clearly saw the hint of a smile on Consort Yu's lips. She couldn't help but furrow her brows. This is the bright moon jade that Ben Consort picked out for you. It suits your complexion very well. Consider it Ben Consort's gift to you. Consort Yu picked out one of the boxes that the palace maid handed over and handed it to her. Chu Qingyan reflexively wanted to refuse, but she couldn't refuse an elder's gift. She could only brace herself and give her thanks as she accepted it. But when the bright moon jade was in her hand, she suddenly felt her fingers go numb. She could only watch as it fell to the ground and broke into 2 pieces. This was something that His Imperial Majesty bestowed to Master. You actually broke it. cried a fierce-looking mama next to Consort Yu. Chu Qingyan's mind was instantly alarmed. She immediately turned to Consort Yu and explained, "Your Highness Consort Yu, Qingyan didn't do it on purpose. Our Highness was kind enough to prepare clothes for you, but you were blinded by greed and stole Her Highness's head ornaments. As expected, you're from a small family and can't be seen in public." Imperial concubine Yu's trusted palace maid, Jade Rabbit, angrily glared at Imperial concubine Yu as she taunted her. Her ability to lie through her teeth was simply perfect. "Qingyan, you've truly disappointed Ben Consort." Imperial concubine Moon's eyes were filled with disappointment as she looked at her. Everything seemed to be her fault. Chapter 108. Upon hearing Consort Yu's words, Chu Qingyan suddenly had the urge to snort coldly. So trying on the clothes was just a pretense. The real reason was to frame her. She was still too naive. As expected, this world of palace intrigue wasn't suitable for her. "Your Highness Consort Yu, how has Qingyan offended you? Please tell me." Chu Qingyan raised her head. Her expression was no longer as naive as before. Since the other party had already so brazenly framed her, what was there to be reconciled with? Consort Yu's hand that had been stroking the hair in front of her chest paused. She looked towards Ji Yunshu mockingly. "What are you saying? How could this consort wrongly accuse someone?" In the end, you and Ranner get along so well that he sneaked out of the palace to look for you in the King of England's residence multiple times. For his sake, this consort would treat you well no matter what. Speaking up to here, Imperial concubine Moon looked at her with a bit of melancholy, but her eyes were filled with malice. "It's a pity that you're too disappointing. Even if you don't like the bright moon jade this concubine gave you, you shouldn't have broken it. If word of this gets out, it doesn't matter if this concubine loses face, but you've implicated Su-er. If outsiders knew that he had such an ignorant princess consort like you, where would he put his face?" Chu Qingyan curled her lips. What a venomous beauty. What a dignified reason. Wasn't it because she couldn't control her own son that she was using this as an opportunity to beat her? Ji Yunshu suddenly understood who Xiao Yao was talking about. It seemed that she and Big Ice Cube were able to enter the palace completely thanks to this person in front of her. "Your Highness, how should we deal with this girl?" asked the fierce-looking mama. Imperial concubine Moon regretfully said, "What she broke was a treasure bestowed by the emperor. If His Majesty were to learn of this, he would surely punish her. If I were to deal with this, His Majesty wouldn't pursue this matter. Then, let me be the villain. Nanny Rong, drag her away and flog her 50 times. Consort Yu then turned to look at Chu Qingyan and said hypocritically, "Don't blame me for being ruthless. If I don't teach you the rules, you'll have more chances to make mistakes in the future. I'm doing this for your own good." As soon as she finished speaking, Nanny Rong ordered 2 palace maids to hold Chu Qingyan and said in a strange tone, "Miss Chu, I'm sorry to offend you. Take her away." Chu Qingyan's hands were held behind her back. She looked coldly at Consort Yu and sneered. If you have a mind to condemn someone, you can always find a pretext. She knew that it was useless to say anything now, so she gave up on the useless struggle. She knew that the Big Ice Cube was outside. As long as she was outside, she would have a chance of survival. Otherwise, she was afraid that she would have to play chess with the King of Hell. When Consort Yu met her gaze, she was slightly startled. It was as if she could see Xiao Su's cold eyes on her. She was a bit flustered, but her expression quickly turned stern. "Drag her away." They left the inner hall and went to the outer hall. However, other than the 2 people's cold teacups, there was no one else. When Consort Yu saw Chu Qingyan's gaze land on Xiao Su's seat, she smiled in understanding. "Are you waiting for Su-er to come save you? It's a pity that he was summoned over by His Majesty just now, so you should obediently accept your punishment." Chu Qingyan bit her lower lip. The last trace of hope in her heart had been extinguished. She should have known that in order to punish her, Consort Yu would definitely send the big ice cube away. She slowly clenched her fists and her eyes darkened. She didn't have superb martial arts skills to break free of these people. She didn't have the supreme authority to intimidate these people. In transmigration dramas, those female leads with golden fingers came back from the jaws of death and were omnipotent. Unfortunately, they weren't her. The long bench was already in front of her. The eunuch holding the torture stick was approaching. Then how was she going to save herself now? Outside the moon hall, a figure slowly walked over. It was Xiao Ran, who had heard that his eldest brother and Chu Qingyan had been invited to the moon hall. Your Highness, Fourth Highness, you aren't reading in the hall and instead came to find Imperial Concubine Moon at this time. Imperial Concubine Moon will punish you. Maid Lu Liyue, who was following beside him, nagged at Xiao Ran. Because he could see Chu Qingyan, Xiao Ran was in a good mood. He casually said to Lu Liyue, "It's fine. Imperial Mother loves me so much. She won't punish me for such a small matter. But Consort Yu specifically instructed you to stay in the hall. If you..." Xiao Ran's personal bodyguard, Mo Wang, hadn't finished speaking when he was interrupted by Xiao Ran. "No buts, don't say anything. If you still have so much to say, you can return to the hall on your own." Xiao Ran was a bit impatient. He was most annoyed by not being allowed here and there. If he had known earlier, he wouldn't have brought them along. It was better to talk less in the rain. Lu Liyue and Mo Wang, who were disdained by their highness, looked at each other and immediately fell silent. Although Consort Yu sent them to take care of His Highness Fourth Prince, their direct master was His Highness Fourth Prince. If they angered him, they might not be able to continue their duties. After his ears were cleared, Xiao Ran strode to the entrance of the moon hall. As he approached, his mood slowly became nervous and expectant. Today, he didn't have a good chat with Qingyan. When he went back, he felt it was a pity. Now that they were going to meet again, he began to think about what to say when the time came. Mo Wang and Lu Liyue had never seen His Highness so hesitant and excited before. They were a bit confused. His Highness was always serious when he went to the moon hall, so why was he acting so strange this time? When Xiao Ran arrived at the moon hall, the expressions of the palace maids and eunuchs guarding the entrance suddenly changed. No one expected that His Highness Fourth Prince would suddenly arrive. "Quickly go and report that His Highness is here." After Xiao Ran finished speaking, he was a bit impatient. "Forget it, His Highness will go in by himself." After saying that, Xiao Ran walked into the hall by himself. The palace maids and eunuchs on duty immediately blocked his way and said with a hurried expression, "Fourth Prince, Her Highness is receiving an important guest. You should leave first. Wait until the important guest leaves, then you can come back, okay?" "Important guest?" Xiao Ran smiled in understanding. What kind of important guest are eldest brother and Qingyan? Even His Highness often goes to find them to play. "Move aside, let His Highness enter." "This is Her Highness's order." "Fourth Prince, please don't make things difficult for us servants." The palace maids blocked the entrance and said in a low voice, but their tone was very firm. Xiao Ran narrowed his eyes sharply. Mother usually doesn't restrict His Highness from entering the moon hall. Could it be that something happened inside? The palace maids were momentarily speechless. His Highness Fourth Prince had always been smart, but they didn't expect him to see through it so quickly. Xiao Ran was originally probing with words, but the palace maid's reaction immediately made his face darken. As expected, he guessed correctly. "Move aside, otherwise don't blame His Highness for being impolite," Xiao Ran ordered with a cold expression. The palace maids trembled and silently moved aside. Then, Xiao Ran strode past them and headed to the front of the hall. One of the palace maids immediately said to the person beside them, "Quickly go and report to Her Highness that His Highness Fourth Prince has entered the hall." Inside the imperial study, Xiao Su couldn't help but feel a trace of unease. He narrowed his eyes and looked in the direction of the moon hall. Chapter 109. Both of her hands were tied up with ropes. The palace servants were all well-trained and strong, so she didn't have the strength to struggle at all. Nanny Rong placed her large hand on her shoulder and roughly pinned her down onto the bench. She was young and immature, so she wasn't a match for these people at all. Her shoulders were burning with pain and her knees hit the bench, causing her legs to stiffen. She gritted her teeth and didn't allow herself to scream. She didn't have any martial arts skills to protect herself, so she didn't have the right to say no. She suddenly felt very sad. She felt that she hadn't adapted to the rules of survival in this era, so she always ended up in trouble. The smoky red dress appeared in front of her eyes. She raised her head slightly and met Consort Yu's mocking gaze. That day on the streets of the capital, you were able to save that girl, but have you ever thought about who would save you today? Child, sometimes you shouldn't be too naive. Today, this consort will teach you some principles of life. That day, she had already received a message from her younger brother. Chu Qingyan dared to go against the Fu family because she had Xiao Su behind her. Therefore, she wouldn't allow Xiao Su to become even more arrogant. Imperial concubine Moon, for you to treat a 10-year-old child like this, don't you feel apologetic? Although she was sad, the most important thing right now was to protect herself. She was already trapped, and the only thing she could do was to stall for time until Big Ice Cube came to save her. Otherwise, she didn't know if she could withstand 50 strikes with her current body. Feel bad? What is 10 years old? Consort Yu raised her eyebrows and smiled cruelly, like a viper. 10 years ago, this consort was. Just as she opened her mouth, Consort Yu saw the light in Chu Qingyan's eyes and stopped talking. How could she say what happened that year so easily? She was the one who had planned the fire that year. Unfortunately, he still managed to escape, but it was no different from being crippled. Chu Qingyan looked at her suspiciously. What happened 10 years ago? Consort Yu bent down and reached out to touch Chu Qingyan's face lovingly, but she turned her head away. Consort Yu was not angry. Instead, she said gently, "Are you trying to stall for time and wait for Su? Don't worry, he won't be back every hour." Then, Consort Yu stood up and ordered the guards, "Begin." Consort Yu. Chu Qingyan suddenly said. Consort Yu stopped halfway and turned to look at Chu Qingyan. Is there anything else you want to say? Chu Qingyan pursed her lips and looked at her. Her eyes were bright. Even the Empress is wary of using private punishment in the palace. Consort Yu Nyang Nyang, are you trying to abuse your power for personal gain? Consort Yu bent down and patted Chu Qingyan's face. Her tone was smug. Chu family's little girl, what do you think this consort relied on to sit firmly in the Moon Palace? Chu Qingyan frowned. Then, she thought of the peony flowers she saw when she entered the Moon Palace today. The peony flower was the king of flowers. Since ancient times, it had symbolized the empress of the country. It was an outstanding beauty. However, Consort Yu dared to plant this flower in the front hall, and it was even a garden full of flowers. It was clear that she was ambitious. She was not satisfied with her current position, but it was also clear that she had a place in Sichuan Emperor's heart. There were rules in the palace. The empress, concubines, princesses, and princes all had their expenses regulated. Therefore, she was able to plant these flowers right under the empress's nose. Presumably, Sichuan Emperor allowed it. Otherwise, with Empress Liang's personality, she definitely wouldn't let it go. Consort Yu's backer was Sichuan Emperor. When she realized this, Chu Qingyan suddenly understood why Consort Yu dared to frame her so brazenly. Was she fearless? But was she really fearless? But aren't you worried that if His Highness the Fourth Prince knew that you treated his friends like this, what would he think of you? Consort Yu sneered, don't make a final struggle. If you want to use Ranner as a shield, then this consort advises you not to waste any more effort. Ranner will never know what happened today. As for the 50 beatings, you won't be able to escape. Is that so? Consort Yu originally didn't want to take it seriously, but when she heard Consort Yu's determined tone, she couldn't help but frown. Then, she noticed that Consort Yu was looking past her and behind her. She immediately felt something and turned her head. The shocked expression of the person behind her immediately jumped into her eyes. Ranner. Consort Yu's beautiful face turned pale. Mufei, what are you doing? Xiao Ran pointed a trembling finger at Chu Qingyan. His voice was also trembling as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Imperial concubine mother is teaching her a lesson. She disobeyed her superiors and broke the treasure your imperial father bestowed, so imperial concubine mother gave her a light punishment. Imperial concubine Moon's panic upon seeing her son was instantly put away, reversing black and white. Giving her a light punishment? Was 50 paddles just a light punishment? Even an adult would be half dead after 50 beatings. Qingyan is still a child. Xiao Ran's eyes widened. He couldn't believe that these words were coming from his normally gentle mother. Consort Yu heard this and her eyes narrowed. Ranner, are you questioning Mufei for an insignificant outsider? Xiao Ran's heart tightened. He had always been filial to his Mufei and respected her. Perhaps it was because what he had seen today had surpassed his understanding of his Mufei and his mind was in a mess. Now that his Mufei had said this, he was afraid that his Mufei would be sad, so his tone immediately softened. Mufei, Qingyan isn't an outsider. She's Ai's friend. She's young and doesn't know any better, so can you be magnanimous and not bicker with her? The relationship between people was like a spring. If you were strong, they would be weak. If you were weak, they would be strong. So when Xiao Ran softened his tone, Consort Yu became firm. She thought of the news she had received before. It seemed like Chu Qingyan had really bewitched Ranner. Right now, Ranner was still young and couldn't tell. Once they grew up, no one knew what would happen in the future. She wouldn't allow Ranner to get involved with this lowly girl. So, she had to nip everything in the bud. A country has its laws and a family has its rules. Mufei can't make an exception for this matter. Consort Yu said firmly. Then she said to the person holding the weapon, start the execution. Xiao Ran immediately ran over and stopped the eunuch. He turned to his Mufei and said sadly, Mufei, as long as I is here today, I won't allow you to hurt Qingyan. After speaking, Xiao Ran said to Chu Qingyan, who was lying on the bench, Qingyan, don't be afraid. I'll protect you. Chu Qingyan's eyes reddened slightly, thank you. Consort Yu saw the interaction between the two and was furious. She said to the eunuch who was hesitating, what are you waiting for? Pull the fourth prince away. Yes. This prince wants to see who dares. As soon as Xiao Ran finished speaking, he was grabbed. Anger appeared on his face, but he couldn't break free no matter how hard he struggled. He glared at his Mufei and said hoarsely, Mufei, you can't do this. You can't do this. Ranner, don't interfere in this matter. Since they had already come this far, they couldn't give up halfway. Consort Yu raised her hand and gave the order. Xiao Ran was pulled to the side by several tall and strong guards. Xiao Ran watched as his Mufei ordered the eunuchs to carry out the execution. His eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Mufei, you can't do this. His Mufei wanted to make a move on his only friend, but he couldn't do anything about it. Sorrow welled up in his heart. Qingyan, Consort Yu, stop. A cold and harsh voice rang out. Chapter 110. Consort Yu, stop. As soon as this voice came out, Imperial concubine Moon unhappily frowned. Why had another person suddenly appeared halfway through? But this voice, Chu Qingyan looked over Consort Yu's shoulder when she heard the voice. She saw a woman dressed in a palace robe embroidered with peonies. She was holding the hand of a nanny by her side as she slowly walked in. Her makeup was exquisite, and she had a pretty face. Her aura was graceful and luxurious, but her eyes were indifferent. Chu Qingyan seemed to see the shadow of the big ice cube in her. Could it be that this person was related to the big ice cube? Just as Chu Qingyan was pondering, Consort Yu turned around and saw the newcomer. Her expression changed slightly, but she quickly put on a gentle expression. So it's Sister Empress who has graced us with her presence. This younger sister didn't go out to greet you. These palace servants are really derelict in their duties. They didn't even inform me of your arrival. This younger sister will definitely teach them well later. Sister Empress? Chu Qingyan immediately realized that this person was the Big Ice Cube's mother, Liang Yuan. She was the second daughter of the left Prime Minister of Sichuan, Liang Qingyu. No wonder she felt that this person was similar to the Big Ice Cube. She suddenly thought that since Empress Liang was so refined and beautiful, how elegant would the Big Ice Cube's original appearance be? It was rumored that the fire from 10 years ago had already destroyed his face. Her heart couldn't help but ache. If it wasn't for that big fire, what kind of purple appearance would that cold and transcendent person have? Empress Liang pulled Chu Qingyan out of her own world. She said with a faint smile, "If you had reported it, how could you have seen me teaching my daughter-in-law on your behalf?" The mocking words made Consort Yu unhappy. She still smiled and said, "Sister, what are you saying? Qingyan is still young and doesn't know the rules of the palace. I heard that you had something to do today and let Qingyan and Su-er go back first. Sister thought that since you are so busy, you should let you, who is free, share your burden and help you teach Qingyan. Ah, perhaps Qingyan is really young and doesn't know anything. She accidentally broke the treasure that His Majesty gave her. I originally wanted to let it go, but if I covered it up in public, how could I manage the palace in the future? So, I endured the pain and came to punish her." What he said was reasonable, as if there was no way to pick out a flaw from it. Empress Liang sat down in the main seat with the help of Luo Yun. She put her hands on her knees and looked at the virtuous Consort Yu in front of her with a slightly mocking expression. If the palace maid hadn't reported today that Consort Yu had invited Su-er and his wife to the Moon Palace and sent Su-er away, she probably wouldn't have expected that Consort Yu would want to find trouble with Chu Qingyan in order to deter her. Although she wanted Chu Qingyan to disappear from this world, she wouldn't allow Fu Yuyue, that bitch, to use Chu Qingyan to slap her face. Chu Qingyan was still Su-er's Wangfei on the surface. Hitting Chu Qingyan was slapping Su-er's face. Not only that, it was also slapping her face and the Liang family's face. Although she was dissatisfied with Chu Qingyan, she had no choice but to save her. But what made her even angrier was Consort Yu's attitude. She used the excuse of teaching her daughter-in-law a lesson for her to slap her face. Mimi is too polite. Jijie is really happy to have such a considerate and gentle Mimi. Empress Liang smiled faintly, but anyone could hear the mockery in her words. Chu Qingyan blinked. Watching this battle of words without smoke, she finally understood what she had heard before. The harem was like a battlefield. It was crueler than real swords and spears. There was no blood. But who was Consort Yu? She had been in the harem for so many years that she had long trained her body to the point of perfection. She took Empress Liang's words as sincere praise and smiled appropriately. Then since Jijie is here, let's watch Mimi teach that girl Qingyan. Empress Liang glanced at Chu Qingyan, who had been forced to lie on the bench. Although she didn't like her, she couldn't just leave her be when she was being threatened. Thus, she picked up the tea that a palace servant had brought over, lifted the lid, and slowly took a sip. Only then did she reply unhurriedly. Mimi said that because this consort didn't have time to teach her, this consort took over. Now that this consort has some free time, it's better for this consort to personally teach this girl. For Jijie to say this, Mimi is really happy for that girl from the Chu family. However, since everything has been prepared, why don't Jijie teach her in the Moon Hall? That way, we won't have to change locations and waste time. What do you think, Jijie? Consort Yu said sincerely as if she was really thinking for the other. Hearing this, Empress Liang's anger was stuck in her throat. Consort Yu was really counting her chickens before they hatched. If she taught Chu Qingyan a lesson in the Moon Hall, then if word got out that she had set up a private punishment and severely punished a little girl, who was her own daughter-in-law. Not only would she be said to be vicious, most importantly, it would cause His Majesty to lose face. Because this daughter-in-law that had been bestowed by the emperor had been taught a lesson by her on her first visit to the palace, no matter what the rumors were, it would be disadvantageous to her. However, if she hadn't appeared, the matter of Consort Yu privately punishing Chu Qingyan wouldn't have caused any waves in His Majesty's eyes. His Majesty liked Consort Yu. No matter what Consort Yu did, His Majesty would do his best to exonerate her. On the other hand, if she did something, His Majesty would only think that she was vicious. This was the difference between her and Consort Yu. Empress Liang thought of the suffering she had suffered at Consort Yu's hands these past few years, and the veins on the back of her hands popped out. Seeing this, Luoyun knew that her mistress had been successfully angered by Consort Yu. She knew that things weren't going well and immediately reminded her in a low voice, "Nyang Nyang, is the tea too hot? Do you want this servant to have someone change it?" The implication was that one mustn't get angry at a time like this. When Empress Liang heard this, she restrained her expression. She was almost angered by Consort Yu again. The veins on her hands faintly disappeared. She then looked indifferently at Chu Qingyan, who had been quietly lying down since she appeared. At least this girl wasn't so noisy. Her dislike for her lessened a little. She then said to Consort Yu, "No need. Mimi is a lovely person who likes peace and quiet. Shouting and killing doesn't suit you, so it's better for this consort to bring this girl back." On the side, Xiao Ran had been nervously listening to the two's conversation. When he heard Empress Liang say this, he was instantly overjoyed. Although Empress Liang was a vicious person, she was still eldest brother's Mufei. At the very least, she wouldn't be too cruel to Chu Qingyan. Moreover, he would have time to tell his eldest brother and have him save Qingyan. But Consort Yu was in a difficult position. No buts. "Mimi, rest early. This consort will be taking her away." Empress Liang didn't allow any explanation as she stood up. The people she had brought with her immediately untied Chu Qingyan's ropes and pulled Chu Qingyan up. Then they followed behind Empress Liang and left. "Your Highness, you're letting the Empress take that girl away just like that?" Her trusted palace maid, Jade Rabbit, asked in confusion. Consort Yu hooked her lips in a smile. This consort's original intention was to annoy the Empress. Since this consort's goal has been achieved, it doesn't matter whether we fight or not. The important thing was that she had slapped Liang Yuan. That was enough. "Ranner, stop right there." Consort Yu immediately called out when she saw the figure walking towards the door from the corner of her eye. Chapter 111. Xiao Ran, who was just about to sneak away, was suddenly called. His body stiffly turned around. "Mufei. Where are you going?" Consort Yu smiled with narrowed eyes, her expression containing an indescribable gentleness and threat. Xiao Ran recalled her actions just now and his heart ached. "Mufei, I want to return to the hall." "Is that so? You can't be going to find your eldest brother?" Consort Yu still had the same expression. Xiao Ran didn't think that his thoughts would be seen through so quickly. He lowered his head and denied through gritted teeth, "I'm not going to find eldest brother, I'm really going to return to the hall." Consort Yu smiled slightly, then turned to face Mo Wang and Lu Liyue, her tone instantly icy. "Do you two know your wrongs?" Mo Wang and Lu Liyue immediately knelt in fright. Servant, Nurse Rong, drag these two away." Consort Yu said coldly. Xiao Ran originally thought that he had escaped a calamity, but he didn't think that Mufei would punish Mo Wang and Lu Liyue. He immediately ran in front of the two and asked in confusion, "Mufei, what did they do wrong?" They didn't dissuade their masters from making a big mistake. Mu Fei sent them to your side to remind you and assist you, not to instigate their masters to rebel against Mu Fei. Consort you ordered without any explanation, and Mo Wang and Lu Liyue were dragged away. Fourth Highness, save thee servant, ah! Mu Fei, have mercy! Fourth Highness, have mercy! Those cries, the sound of flesh being torn apart, Xiao Ran couldn't bear to look away, the pain in his eyes slowly flowing. He had seen Mu Fei punish palace servants before, but this was the first time he felt incomparably depressed. Imperial concubine Moon coldly watched as the palace servants flogged the two people. She slowly said to Xiao Ran, if a servant is disobedient, then they must be punished. If you can't bear it, then let Imperial concubine mother do it. However, you must believe that Imperial mother is doing this for your own good. The cries for mercy slowly died down. Xiao Ran responded numbly, Mu Fei, I understand. That night, when Xiao Ran walked out of the Moon Palace, he was followed by the new palace servants that his mother had bestowed upon him. He walked blankly on the road back to the palace, but for the first time, he felt as if he couldn't see the way back. Your Highness. It's raining. I feel so cold. Lu Yu, who was standing respectfully at the entrance of the hall, was puzzled. It was clearly a hot summer day, so why did His Highness feel cold? What was cold was not his body, but his heart. On the other side, Chu Qingyan followed Empress Liang out of the Moon Hall. The surroundings were deathly silent, and the atmosphere was stifling. Chu Qingyan knew that Empress Liang wouldn't have come to save her if it weren't for her reputation. She suddenly felt like laughing. She must be very depressed to save someone she didn't want to save. But before the smile could reach her lips, it withered with bitterness. Tonight, the most depressed person wasn't just Empress Liang, but also herself. She looked at the dim yellow light cast by the palace lanterns on the ground, like a large net that couldn't be seen clearly. It wanted to wrap her inside, making it hard to breathe. At this time, a group of people walked to the entrance of the Chaoyang Palace and stopped. Chu Qingyan raised her head and saw a familiar figure standing under the palace lanterns. He was tall and slender, like a jade tree. Chu Qingyan's eyes instantly became hot. She wanted to immediately run over, but her reason suppressed her excitement and grievance. She stood in place, only daring to look at him. Xiao Su didn't look at Chu Qingyan behind Empress Liang. Instead, he stepped forward and respectfully bowed, I greet Imperial Mother. Your timing is really accurate. Empress Liang looked at Chu Qingyan behind her and sneered. Many thanks to Imperial Mother for saving me. Xiao Su didn't deny that he had come to Chaoyang Palace to wait after learning that Imperial Mother had gone to Moon Hall and directly thanked her. Empress Liang laughed coldly, this consort didn't do it to save her. This consort just doesn't like people using this opportunity to slap the Liang family's face. I understands, said Xiao Su indifferently. Chu Qingyan pursed her lips. This big ice cube didn't just treat Sichuan Emperor like a superior and subordinate. Even when interacting with Empress Liang, it didn't seem to have any familial affection. Empress Liang was like a hedgehog. Every word she said was like a thorn, but the big ice cube accepted it without complaint. She suddenly understood why the big ice cube was so cold. A large part of it was because of this imperial empress. If she didn't make herself cold and indifferent, she would probably be hurt every time she interacted with this imperial empress. Empress Liang was displeased when she saw that her son was still so stubborn. She turned to look at Chu Qingyan and raised a brow. Chu Qingyan, don't think that this consort recognizes your existence just because this consort saved you. As long as you haven't married Su, your status doesn't count in this consort's eyes. Don't flatter yourself to win this consort's favor. In the future, you're on your own. Chu Qingyan rubbed her nose. Flattering herself? She wasn't good at it. Empress Liang smiled coldly and then walked towards Chaoyang Palace with the palace maids. When she brushed past Xiao Su, she said in a low voice that only the two of them could hear, "You have to protect this girl well. Mu Fei definitely won't show mercy to her." Xiao Su raised his head to look at the graceful and magnificent face in front of him. Bystanders would find it hard to imagine that those malicious words came from the mouth of this virtuous and gentle woman, his Mu Fei. His expression didn't change. "Farewell, Mu Fei." When the doors to Chaoyang Palace opened and closed again, Xiao Su turned to look at the petite figure in the shadows. "Qing Yan, come here." Although the voice was cold, it made Chu Qingyan's eyes moisten. She silently raised her head. Her eyes were sparkling like the best colored glass in the world, sparkling with silver light. Xiao Su felt like a corner of his heart had collapsed. Chu Qingyan tightly clenched her fists. In the end, she loosened them and slowly walked towards the tall and seemingly omnipotent person. There were no tears, no grievances, no complaints, and no impatient hugs. Xiao Su looked at the person in front of him with some surprise. Suddenly, his sleeve was gently tugged. "Big ice cube, I'm hungry." Xiao Su lowered his head to look at her somewhat embarrassed appearance. He reached out to straighten out her slightly open clothes and replied, "Let's go home." "Okay." Chu Qingyan replied in a low voice. It wasn't that she didn't want to complain. She wanted to hug the person in front of her tightly. But reason told her that she couldn't. She didn't want to be the person who only knew how to complain. That wasn't her. She was Chu Qingyan, a strong university student in the 21st century. She wasn't the real 10-year-old Chu Qingyan. Only cowards would cry. Thus, the two figures, one big and one small, slowly walked out of the palace. When they got on the carriage, Xiao Su saw that Chu Qingyan was talking and laughing like before. It was as if she hadn't been affected by the previous reproach. Since she didn't want to say it, then he wouldn't ask. He reached out and pulled Chu Qingyan, who was playing with the toys in the car, into his arms. Although she didn't want to say it, he wanted to hug her. In the end, everything was because of him. With his identity, he was destined to bring danger to the people around him. Starting tomorrow, this king will arrange for people to teach you self-defense. Chu Qingyan was still shocked by the big ice cube's sudden initiative, but she didn't think that there would be a shocking thunder behind it. Self-defense? Didn't that mean that she couldn't sleep in anymore? This was a bolt from the blue. Why? After you learn martial arts, at least you can run faster when you encounter a problem. What's the use of running faster? You'll be caught sooner or later. Wrong, buy time so that this king can help you solve it. Otherwise, when this king arrives next time, you'll already be dead. So the big ice cube wanted her to learn martial arts so that it would be easier for her to escape. Chu Qingyan thought about it and reluctantly agreed. But no one knew that Xiao Su was smashing his own foot with a rock. Every time he was angered, the one who ran the fastest was her. Chapter 112. After half a day of fright and apprehension, Chu Qingyan fell asleep in the carriage. When they got off the carriage, Xiao Su carried her down. Her body was as light as a feather. Xiao Su frowned and turned to walk into the Fu. White Tiger and the other servants who were respectfully waiting at the door saw their lord carrying Chu Qingyan and lowered their heads. They originally thought that their master was only interested in Chu Qingyan for a moment, but reality proved that they were wrong. "Lord, you're back." Hong Yi led everyone to welcome him, but when they met their lord's eyes, they all fell silent. They saw that Chu Qingyan was sleeping soundly in his arms, so they stopped what they were going to say and carefully retreated. When they arrived at Chu Qingyan's room, Xiao Su placed her on the bed. When his hand touched the thin brocade, his hand paused, and then he walked out of the room. "Lord, do you want to eat now?" Hong Yi was waiting outside the room. When she saw him come out, she asked softly. "Not for now." Xiao Su calmly replied. Then he thought of something, "Tell Lve to change Qingyan's bed." In the future, she will be responsible for all of Qingyan's living arrangements. Hong Yi was slightly surprised. Of the 7 servant girls who were originally Lord's personal servants, Huang Yi had already become Chu Qingyan's personal chef. Chu Qingyan was responsible for Chu Qingyan's brush, ink, paper, and inkstone. Hong Yi was pulled back to practice again. Now, even Lve was responsible for Chu Qingyan's living arrangements. Hong Yi didn't know when she would have to listen to Chu Qingyan's orders in the future. The 7 servant girls would also have a new master. But the well-trained Hong Yi quickly responded. All of these changes caught her off guard, but she still had to follow orders. After giving his orders, Xiao Su walked to the study. The fire spirit Turan hiding in the darkness appeared behind him. Lord. The two bowed in unison. How is the investigation going? Xiao Su did not stop and slowly walked forward. It was Fu An who sent someone to tell Consort you about the young princess. Adding on the fact that the 4th prince often comes to the Wang Fu, Consort you thought that you were misleading the 4th prince, so she wanted to start with the young princess. The fire spirit slowly said. Xiao Su faintly. Lord, what should this subordinate do? Huoling was rubbing his palms together and couldn't hold himself back anymore. Although he still didn't quite approve of Chu Qingyan's status as the little princess consort, Xiao Lai's men were all protective of their own people. He had already automatically taken Chu Qingyan into his camp. Now that one of his own was being bullied, how could he take this lying down? Although Turan didn't say anything, he clearly had the same thoughts as Huoling, do whatever you want, as long as you don't kill anyone. He always trusted his subordinates. Understood. Huoling revealed his eerie white teeth. Fu An Lai. Wait for this prince. Halfway through, Xiao Su spoke, from now on, you two will be responsible for teaching Qingyan martial arts. What? Teaching martial arts? Turan and Huoling's eyes twitched. With the young princess' small body, how could she endure the cruel training methods of Xiao Lai cavalry? Wang, Lord, you aren't joking, right? Huoling dug his ears in disbelief. Xiao Su faintly glanced at him. Does this king look like someone who would joke? Huoling instantly lowered his head. No. There are no weak soldiers under a strong general. It's time for her to learn how to protect herself. Xiao Su's eyes darkened as he looked at the crescent moon in the sky. Sometimes when he wasn't by her side, if she didn't even have the ability to protect herself, then she would be eaten up sooner or later. Today's matter was a warning. Huoling rolled his eyes and then poked Turan beside him. I'm going to teach that brat from the Fu family a lesson. I'll leave teaching the young princess to you. Turan rolled his eyes at him. Just as the two were about to start bickering, their master spoke again. Have Mu Ling return to the palace. Leave everything on hand to the subordinates. Turan asked in confusion, Lord, the arch bridge over the Huailiu River hasn't been built yet. Is there something important that you want him to return at this time? Just follow orders. Xiao Su coughed softly as he didn't know how to explain things to his subordinates for the first time. He couldn't possibly tell them that he only felt that Qing Yan would have to go through a tough process to train in martial arts, so he gave her a hard time. At the very least, he had to give her a sweet reward to coax her. As for his subordinates, other than the wood spirit, he couldn't think of anyone else who could accomplish this task. It was just that Xiao Su, who had the metal, wood, water, fire, and earth elements under his command, actually had an army that was useless. It seemed like they didn't have enough skills. Understood. Turan didn't understand, but he still complied. But no one knew, even Turan, who was far away on the Huailiu River, didn't know that the last time he was summoned back by his master, it was to build Zhaixing Lu. This time, it was to mess around with those little things that made people want to cry. And the metal, wood, water, fire, and earth spirits didn't know that just now, they were despised by their master, because they didn't have the skills to coax children. What kind of skill was this? If the 5 elemental spirits knew, they would probably die of depression. In the study, Ling thought of something and immediately reported, "Master, Ethereal will be able to return to the palace in 3 days." Some time ago, an infectious disease broke out in Ling City. The imperial court was helpless, so he secretly sent Ethereal to investigate. A few days ago, Ethereal had already sent a letter back, saying that it had already been resolved. Xiao Su calculated the time. It was about time. After sitting in the study for a while and settling everything that needed to be settled, Xiao Su got up and walked towards Chu Qingyan's room. This child had slept enough, it was time to get up and eat. Walking in front of the bed, Chu Qingyan just happened to wake up from hunger. She was rubbing her eyes as she slowly woke up. She hazily saw the person in front of the bed and couldn't help but reach out her hand, muttering in a small voice, "Hug." Xiao Su raised his eyebrows, but saw her stubbornly reach out her hand. He lightly sighed and then bent down to pick her up from the bed. "Don't do it again." His cold voice sounded in her ears. Chu Qingyan smiled slyly and tightly hugged his neck, comfortably pressing her head against his chest. Xiao Ran didn't know that this wouldn't happen again. He had broken it once, so he would break it again and again. After exiting the door, Chu Qingyan saw a lady carrying a high-quality brocade bed that was thinner than the one she was sleeping on. The lady was dressed in a jade-green robe. She bowed politely to the two of them before turning to enter her room. "Is this for me?" Chu Qingyan asked him. "N." The weather was getting hotter and hotter, children were prone to heatstroke. If she changed to a better one, she would be able to sleep more comfortably. Chu Qingyan rubbed against his neck and giggled, "Big Ice Cube is so nice, but as long as I stay beside Big Ice Cube, I can feel the cold air emitted from your body. It's better to relieve the heat than a mountain resort." Xiao Su narrowed his eyes. "Tomorrow morning, don't forget to wake up for morning exercise." As he said that, he put her down and went into the hall. Morning. 5:00. No. In an instant, all the sleepiness disappeared. Chapter 113. After a gloomy dinner, Chu Qingyan went to bed. She didn't know if Big Ice Cube was telling the truth. 5:00. Was it dawn? With a stomach full of anxiety, Chu Qingyan fell into a deep sleep. As soon as the sun rose, there was already a person standing at the door. It was Turan, dressed in black. He frowned and looked at the closed door and Xining, who was standing at the door and didn't know what to do. "Has your master woken up?" The cold air was released. Not yet." She trembled. "Why don't you wake her up?" The cold air was released. Why? She trembled. Turan endured. "Lord asked me to teach your master martial arts." "Don't talk nonsense. Wake her up." Okay. Xining looked at him timidly and turned to push the door open. Only then did she spit out the word from her throat, "Fierce." Turan's ears were sensitive. Hearing this, the veins on his forehead bulged. Okay, he endured. For the task given by his master. Feeling the cold air outside getting worse, Xining immediately slipped into the room and walked quickly to her master. At this moment, Chu Qingyan was sleeping soundly. Suddenly, someone called out to her. In her daze, she seemed to have returned to the time when she had just entered the King Manor. Big Ice Cube had tortured her to wake up for breakfast. She immediately waved her hand and said, "Big Ice Cube, I'm not eating." "Master, it's not Ice Cube. Lord Turan is waiting for you to practice martial arts outside." Xining immediately explained. "Turan? Practice martial arts?" Chu Qingyan subconsciously shivered and opened her eyes unwillingly. Turan, who was outside, saw that the person inside still didn't come out. He was unwilling to be the teacher of a little girl. He immediately said impatiently, "Little Princess Consort, Lord asked me to teach you martial arts. Please don't delay." She didn't expect that Big Ice Cube would ask Turin to teach her. Although she was still sleepy, she still got up after thinking about it. After all, Big Ice Cube did it for her own good. After washing up, Chu Qingyan went out and bumped into Turin. Sorry to trouble you, Turin. She yawned and said to him. Turin glanced at her. You're late by half an hour. The training will be extended by an hour. Chu Qingyan immediately stopped yawning. She was no longer sleepy. She widened her eyes as she watched the person in front of her walk away. Another half an hour? How long would the training be? Chu Qingyan quickly caught up with the person in front of her. After turning left and right, she arrived at a spacious courtyard. There was a stone table and several stone chairs in the courtyard. There was an incense burner on the table and several unlit incense sticks on the table. There was a basin of water on the stone chair. Chu Qingyan was confused. Was he going to take a bath and burn incense? Turin walked in front of her and said coldly, It's an awkward stage for you to practice martial arts at your age. Because your bones are almost fully grown, you can't reshape them. But Master wants you to have the ability to protect yourself. So we can only try our best. Dead horse? Chu Qingyan blushed with shame. Dear, can you change the metaphor? Stand at attention. Turin saw that she obeyed and said slowly, You have to stand on the pole for 3 years. If you want to learn how to fight, you have to do the horse stance. If you want to learn the first step, you have to learn the horse stance. Look carefully. Turin opened his legs in front of her and said, Open your legs and see the length of 3 feet. Then squat down slowly with your knees facing outwards, but not more than the distance between your toes. Straighten your back and chest and put your hands on your waist. Okay, you do it. Chu Qingyan nodded. Then, she imitated him and got into a horse stance. However, the moment she got into the stance, the earth spirit produced a bamboo stick out of nowhere and hit her right leg. Keep it in. Why is it so wide? When the bamboo stick hit her leg, she didn't feel anything at first, but after a while, she felt a burning pain. It was her first time learning martial arts, so it was normal to make mistakes. But who would have thought that Turin didn't give her a chance to correct and hit her with the bamboo stick? Chu Qingyan was a little angry, but she still did as she was told. She heard that Turin was in charge of the ice cube and had a large number of secret guards. His position was very high. It was a waste of his talent to be sent to teach her. She had nothing to complain about. In just a short quarter of an hour, her back was aching, and the back of her hands, waist, and calves had been hit no less than 10 times. Sir Turin, let's talk nicely. You can't treat Master like this. Xining stood at the side and said with a little heartache. Her summer clothes were thin, and her master's skin was soft and tender. How could she withstand his whip again and again? Originally, he had already tolerated Xining holding a brocade handkerchief to wipe Chu Qingyan's sweat from time to time, but he didn't expect this little girl to talk back to him. Turin coldly glanced at her. Do you think that the enemy will talk nicely with you outside? Moreover, am I the instructor or are you the instructor? Xining was a little frightened by his glare, but seeing her master's pale face, she still bravely argued, but Master is learning martial arts for the first time. Can't you be a little more tolerant? Chu Qingyan immediately stopped her, afraid that this Turin would do something to her. Xining, I'm fine. Turin flicked the bamboo stick in his hand and mercilessly ordered, light the incense. When the incense burns out, you can rest. Xining wanted to say something, but when she received her master's signal and heard Turin's order, she was afraid that if she said something to anger him, he would make her master uncomfortable again. After the order was given, a black-clothed person suddenly appeared by the stone table. His hand brushed the tip of the incense, and the smoke spiraled out. Then, he inserted it into the incense burner mountain and disappeared with a turn. Chu Qingyan was a little envious of this superb qinggong. Turin saw the envy in her eyes and said coldly, "It's not impossible to reach his level." Chu Qingyan was instantly interested. "How long will it take?" Turin glanced at her, "But according to your current learning ability, I'm afraid it's not something that can be achieved in a short time." Chu Qingyan pursed her lips. His words were as good as not saying anything. "Don't move." The bamboo stick hit her back, and Chu Qingyan almost cried out. It was really painful. Turin saw that she was angry but didn't dare to say anything. He snorted coldly and then waved his hand to let someone pass the water on the stone chair to Chu Qingyan. "What are you doing?" Chu Qingyan didn't understand. "Put it on your head. If you want to grow quickly, you have to increase the amount of training," Turin said sinisterly. Chu Qingyan widened her eyes. Oh my god, was this person not sent by the ice block to torture her? "I don't. Do you want to disappoint the Lord's expectations?" Turin looked at her and sneered. Chu Qingyan remembered the assassination on the street and how powerless she was in the palace yesterday. The words that she wanted to refute were suddenly stuck in her throat. She slowly lowered her head and looked at the water basin in her hand. She wanted to become strong, very strong. Chapter 114. Turin originally wanted to wait for her to get angry so that he could take advantage of the situation and resign from this mission to his master. But when he saw her silently raise the water basin above her head and grit her teeth to persist, he was slightly surprised. He didn't think that she could actually endure his difficulties. Turin's impression of her changed slightly. He then slowly walked around her with his hands behind his back. He ignored her legs that were trembling slightly, ignored her pale face, and her tightly closed lips. He slowly shook the bamboo stick, whether or not he was pointing it out to her, but his strength was no longer that obvious. When the incense stick burned out, Shining glared at Turin with hatred. Then she immediately ran over to help her master take the water basin down. Her pent-up anger was released at this time. She collapsed on the ground. Shining hurriedly went to help her. "Master, are you okay?" Shining asked worriedly. "I'm fine." Chu Qingyan looked at Turin, who was standing with his hands behind his back, and said through gritted teeth. Although she felt that her entire body didn't belong to her, she still needed to have a backbone. She didn't want to be looked down upon by others, and she didn't want to. Turin looked at her. "You still need to run in the evening. I hope that Xiao Wangfei will be there on time." After saying this, Turin leisurely left. Shining made a face at Turin's back and said indignantly, "So hateful. He actually treats master like this. He doesn't know how to be gentle with women at all. A strict teacher produces a fine student. Come, help me up." Chu Qingyan comforted. Shining looked at her master, who was staggering. She couldn't help but feel sad. If she had the chance, she would definitely make Turin pay the price. In the evening, they had to run 20 laps around the courtyard. Chu Qingyan refused at first, but when she saw Turin's expression that said he already knew, Chu Qingyan braced herself and ran down. When she returned to the room, she was lying on the bed. Even when Huang Yi made her favorite dishes, she didn't have the strength to get up. When Xiao Su came back from outside, he received a report from the servants. She didn't come to eat for a long time, so he got up and went to her room to find her. When he came in, he saw her lying on the bed without any strength. She looked very tired. Very tired? Xiao Su sat down on the bed and lowered his head to ask her. Chu Qingyan didn't even look at him when she heard this. Although she wanted to be strong when she accepted Turin's training method, she didn't want to face the big ice block. She subconsciously thought that the big ice block was the one who created the training method for her. He was so inconsiderate of himself. She gave him a bad review. Faced with the anger of the person on the bed, he didn't explain that the training method wasn't created by him. He raised his hand and wanted to tidy up the hair on her forehead, but she turned her head to avoid him. Xiao Su hooked his lips at her childish behavior. He stood up and spoke to the person who was pretending to be dead on the bed. The 5 cavalry masters of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth were brought up by this prince. During their first training, they couldn't even walk. They had to stay in the horse stance for an entire day and night. Even if they ran, they wouldn't stop until they were completely exhausted. Chu Qingyan slowly opened her eyes and looked at him. Wasn't that kind of training too cruel? Cruel? This king was also like this in the past. If you weren't cruel to yourself, then you could only let the enemy be cruel to you. Comparing the two, which one would you rather choose? Xiao Su's eyes calmly looked at the young girl in front of him. He could give her a carefree life, he could also give her a life of luxury, but he couldn't guarantee that when he wasn't around, he could protect her. In his life, there was no what if. Were there only 2 choices? But. She muttered. There are no buts, Qingyan. Xiao Su's gaze was fixed on her. You have already entered the game, so I can't tolerate you. By this king's side, even if you have to go through a mountain of blades and a sea of flames, as long as you don't take off this identity, then you will have to endure the storms of the imperial power with this king. The person in front of her had eyes as deep as a sea of stars. She seemed to be able to understand a lot from his eyes, but it also seemed like there were many things that she couldn't understand, but the only thing she was certain of was that the big ice block was right. If she didn't work hard, then no one would be strong for her. Taking a deep breath, Chu Qingyan revealed a calm smile. Actually, it wasn't that she didn't want to learn martial arts, but she was used to being spoiled by the big ice block. Now that he suddenly became strict with her, she was a bit uncomfortable. Big ice block, I'm hungry, but I can't walk. She pouted. Seeing her admit defeat, Xiao Su's brows relaxed. Actually, he had already planned it out. If she cried or didn't want to learn, he would immediately order Turin not to teach her anymore. But when she tacitly agreed and no longer cared about learning martial arts, he suddenly let out a sigh of relief. Actually, in his heart, he also hoped that she could have the ability to protect herself. He turned around and ordered people to bring dinner into the room. A small table was placed on her bed, and on it were various warm dishes. Chu Qingyan blinked, and said softly to the person beside her who was serving soup, Big ice block, I can't lift my hand. Can you feed me? Xiao Su looked at her for a moment, then took her bowl, picked up the food and scooped the rice to her mouth, and teased, You're delicate like this? Chu Qingyan opened her mouth and took the rice, then said incoherently, This isn't delicate, this is compensation. Who told your subordinate to abuse me? I can only get back my face from you, the master. Seeing her wolfing down the food, Xiao Su decided not to discourage her. Actually, it wasn't that she was delicate. She had been holding the basin for the whole morning, and her hands were really sore. But it would be a lie to say that she didn't even have the strength to hold a spoon. It was just that she missed the time when she was poisoned, and the big ice block fed her food. And it had to be said that Xiao Su's feeding skills had greatly improved. It was no longer as inexperienced as before, and now he was as proficient as his own military strategy. The bowl of rice was finished in a short while. Seeing the person in front of him smacking her lips and wanting another bowl, Xiao Su felt that it was right to let her practice martial arts. At least her small body could be trained to be strong. After eating, Chu Qingyan was already beginning to feel sleepy. Xiao Su frowned when he saw this. It's not good for your body to sleep after eating. Chu Qingyan yawned. Mischievously, she shifted her legs and placed them on his lap. Then, can you give me a massage? It was as if she would go to sleep if he didn't massage her. This was the first time someone had so brazenly asked him to serve her. Xiao Su wanted to scold her, but in the end, he was defeated by her tired expression. He had never served anyone before, but people who practiced martial arts were very familiar with acupuncture points. So he raised his hand to massage her acupuncture points, helping her unclog her blood vessels. Chu Qingyan originally wanted to play, but she didn't think that the big ice cube would really do it. She wanted to tease him a bit, but in the end, she lost to him. When Xiao Su stopped, the person next to him had already fallen asleep on his shoulder. After gently laying her down and covering her with a quilt, Xiao Su left the room. Master. Turan appeared at the door. Add another 100 laps. Yes. No one knew why Turan was punished that day. When Huoling went to watch Turan run while gnawing on the corn cob, he curiously threw this question to Turan. Turan said a tongue twister that confused Huoling. Perhaps Master felt that I was making things difficult for the little princess, but also felt that my difficulties were beneficial to the little princess. But his heart ached for the little princess, but he couldn't stop this training method, so he could only punish me. After Huoling figured it out, the corn cob in his mouth fell to the ground. What the hell? He would stay away from the little princess in the future, even farther away. It was decided like this. Chapter 115. It had to be said that although Turan's training methods were somewhat harsh, the results were undoubtedly very fast. Chu Qingyan had been wobbly when she first did the horse stance for an incense stick's worth of time, but now, she was as steady as Mount Tai for 3 incense sticks worth of time. As for running 20 laps around the courtyard, she was no longer out of breath and her chest was stuffy. Turan was undoubtedly also surprised by Chu Qingyan's progress. It was as if you thought that a piece of useless wood could become a pillar of support in the end. However, Turan did not relax his teaching of her because of this. Instead, he increased the amount of training. Although Chu Qingyan complained that he was so strict, no matter what he said, she did it without any complaints in her heart. She knew that if she wanted to get something, she had to put in some effort. It was just that the training became very difficult because of Turan's method. Running around the courtyard with sandbags on her legs was much more strenuous than running without any weights. On this day, when Chu Qingyan was struggling to walk with 5 pounds of sandbags tied to her legs, the door of the King of England's residence welcomed the cheerful Chu Qingyan's father. Hey, watering the flowers? Chu Qingyan's father waved at Servant A. When Servant A saw that it was him, he immediately opened his hands to protect the precious flowers and said with a trembling voice, Chu, Master Chu. Chu Qingyan's father pursed his lips. Didn't he just pluck a few flowers from him last time? How stingy. Hello, are you cleaning the windows? Chu Qingyan's father greeted Servant B. When Servant B saw that it was him, he immediately straightened his clothes and said with a trembling voice, Chu, Master Chu, this servant has no more candy. Chu Qingyan's father pursed his lips. Didn't he just take a few pieces of candy from him last time? How stingy. Chu Qingyan's father continued to walk forward. When the servants saw him, those who could avoid him avoided him, and those who couldn't, stood still in fear and trepidation. Each and every one of them received Chu Qingyan's gaze. If you were curious as to why Chu Machen's father was so frightening in the eyes of the servants in the King of England's mansion, you could ask any servant and he might give you such an answer. Don't be fooled by Chu Machen's foolishness. He seems to be easy to bully. In fact, when he acts foolishly, he can be as deadly as a super typhoon. Seeing how flustered the servants were, Huoling guessed that the storm-like Father Chu had come again. As expected. Hi, white impermanence. Speak of the devil. Huoling's body stiffened as he slowly turned around, only to see a long thing fall in front of him. He gave a loud cry and quickly jumped onto the tree closest to him. Father Chu rubbed his nose and shook the straw rope in his hand in confusion. He said to Huoling, who was hugging the tree, "Why are you running? This is just a rope." Huoling looked down and sure enough, it was a rope. He wanted to cry but no tears came out as he looked at the innocent Father Chu under the tree. His heart was filled with depression. "In-law, can you please stop scaring people? Your subordinate is too timid to be scared." Kiss. Grandfather? Father Chu knit his brows and took a few steps back. In front of Huo Ling's confused face, he said in a serious voice, "You're not allowed to kiss me. Only Dan Yang and Kai Kai can kiss me." Peng! Huo Ling fell from the tree. Father Chu's brain was really big. Huo Ling's heart was already tired from being tossed around. Father Chu rubbed the back of his head as Huo Ling fell to the ground. After thinking about it, he reluctantly handed the straw rope in his hand to Huo Ling. Kai Kai said that once bitten, twice shy. This is for you. If you often face things you're afraid of, you won't be afraid in the future. You have to bravely face things you're afraid of. White impermanence, I believe you can definitely do it. Father Chu was afraid that he wouldn't be willing to part with the straw rope, so he turned to leave. He didn't forget to turn around and encourage Huo Ling, "Good luck, moi." Huo Ling looked at the straw rope in his hand and looked like he wanted to cry but couldn't. He had already given up on himself when it came to Father Chu. At this time, Servant 3 by the well was rubbing his head for a long time, but he couldn't find the missing well rope. Strange, it was clearly here just now. Father Chu wandered around the study before finding out that Huo Ling had gone out to handle some matters. He then went to the main courtyard to find his daughter, but he was told that she had gone to the courtyard to practice martial arts. Father Chu walked over and quite a few flowers and plants were poisoned by him. When he walked into the courtyard and saw his daughter, he really wanted to run over happily, but he found that someone was whipping her with a bamboo stick from time to time. Father Chu's eyes widened and he was so angry that his teeth itched. He and Dan Yang were never willing to touch a single hair on Kai Kai's head. This bad person actually dared to hit Kai Kai, he had to teach him a lesson. So Father Chu angrily walked over and stood in front of his daughter. He viciously said, "Hey, Black Impermanence, are you jealous that I didn't give you face in the study last time? That's why you're transferring your anger to Kai Kai, right? If it's like this, you're too despicable. You're even more despicable than the mud in the pond. You're 100 times, no, 1,000 times worse than an eagle catching chicks." Turan was concentrating on teaching Chu Qingyan and didn't expect to see such a fierce Father Chu. His eyebrows twitched, as if he was about to fly into a rage. Chu Qingyan was holding a water basin on her head. She was happy to see her father, but she didn't expect him to scold Turan. Although it sounded funny, she felt that this wasn't the time to offend her instructor, so she immediately spoke up to stop her father. "Dad, Turan is teaching me martial arts. He's not bullying me, don't worry." "Don't worry. I'm not worried. Why are you holding a basin on such a hot day? It's not raining yet, and you can't catch any water." Father Chu pursed his lips and pitifully felt sorry for his daughter. Chu Qingyan couldn't help but laugh. "Dad, this isn't for catching water. It's for practicing the martial arts squat. It's okay, Dad, you can play by the side. When I'm done, I'll come and play with you." Father Chu thought for a while and reluctantly nodded. But at this time, Turan said gloomily, "Today's training will be delayed by 30 minutes. A cross appeared on Chu Qingyan's head. Father Chu turned around and glared at Turan, then walked away angrily. He had to listen to his daughter, but it didn't mean that he would let Black Impermanence go. Father Chu walked around the courtyard and glared at Turan from time to time. No matter how strong Turan's willpower was, he couldn't bear it. When he turned around, Father Chu had already looked away as if nothing had happened. Turan was so angry. Father Chu wandered to the entrance of the courtyard and happened to meet the servant who was delivering tea to Turan. Father Chu rolled his eyes and then went up to him. "Chu, Master Chu." The servant girl was so scared that she took 2 steps back. The good reputation of the little princess's father had already spread in the prince's mansion. The servant girl trembled as she saluted. "Delivering tea to Black Impermanence?" Father Chu smiled in a way that he thought was friendly, but he didn't expect that the servant girl was so scared that she trembled even more. Yes, Yes, it's for Turin. Then leave it to me. I'm very familiar with him. Very familiar. This reason. The servant girl wanted to ask, but she handed over the tea shakily under Father Chu's smile. Holding the tea, Father Chu smiled gloomily. Little guy, just you wait. Chapter 116. After training Chu Qingyan for half a day, Turin felt a little thirsty. There was tea on the stone table, so he poured himself a cup without hesitation. Chu Qingyan's father, who was watching him from afar, was extremely nervous but also expectant. At this moment, a figure walked up to him. What are you looking at? A cold voice sounded. I'm watching Black Impermanence drink water, Chu Qingyan's father replied without hesitation. What's there to see? The cold voice was mixed with a hint of disapproval. Because, Chu Qingyan's father laughed, I put chili powder in it. As soon as he finished speaking, the person at the stone table suddenly roared, ah, then, with a whoosh, he ran out of the courtyard to look for water. Chu Qingyan's father pushed his hair back, which was blown by the wind when Turin ran past, and said with emotion, it feels like flying. Nonsense. The cold voice faintly sounded like it didn't know whether to laugh or cry. At this moment, Chu Qingyan's father suddenly reacted. He turned to look at the person beside him and shouted in surprise, son-in-law, you're back. Xiao Su was already used to being surprised by him. Xiao Su walked towards Chu Qingyan, who was squatting, and raised her arm a little higher. Big ice block, when can I really learn martial arts? This was a question she had always wanted to know. Start with the basics first. More haste, less speed. In fact, Turin had already told him that with Qingyan's learning speed, she would be able to learn archery and swordsmanship in a few days. Chu Qingyan replied, yes, I want to learn as soon as possible. No rush. Xiao Su turned and sat down on the stone chair. Chu Qingyan's father also walked around him, as if he had something to say. Say it, what's the matter? Xiao Su said. Chu Qingyan's father scratched his head, son-in-law, Kai is so young. Will she be unable to grow taller if you let her practice martial arts? Can't grow tall. Xiao Su frowned. Look at how tall she is with sandbags tied to her feet and water on her head. She can't even grow taller. Mr. Chu said sternly. Xiao Su smirked. No, it'll grow faster and better this way. Chu Machen's father had always believed in his words. I see. I always feel that Blackie is too short. I'll give it a try when I get back. Mr. Chu made up his mind. Blackie was a dog raised by the Chu family. Little Black, who was squatting in the corner, suddenly sneezed. It immediately looked around vigilantly. Seeing that there was no one around, it relaxed and went back to sleep. It thought that Chu Machen's father had come again and was scared to death. But little did it know that cruel training was coming. Xiao Su never took Chu Machen's father's mutterings to heart. The next day, Chu Qingyan saw Turin's red and swollen lips and had a hard time holding back her laughter. Turin had a stomach full of anger. He had already been laughed at by Huoling the whole morning and had been pointed at by the servants along the way. His anger was about to reach a critical point. Now that he saw Chu Qingyan holding back her laughter, he became even more angry. If it weren't for her father, would he have fallen to this state? Increase the weight of the sandbag by 5 pounds. Chu Qingyan's hands trembled. She wanted to cry but had no tears. She changed the sandbag in her hands to 10 pounds. Now she was running with 20 pounds of weight. Seeing Chu Qingyan running in pain, Turin felt that his anger had dissipated by half. However, when he saw Chu Qingyan's father striding over, Turin felt his lips begin to hurt again. The servants brought in tea and snacks at this time. This time, Turin was cautious and didn't touch the water. He only ate a few pieces of cake. Chu Qingyan's father slowly walked in front of his daughter and then happily ran with her. Father, go sit under the shade of the tree. The sun is very strong. Chu Qingyan persuaded. No, I want to experience the feeling of running. Seeing that her father insisted, Chu Qingyan let him go. Running with the wind, freedom is the direction, chasing the power of thunder and lightning, putting the vast ocean into my chest, even the smallest sail can sail far away, Mr. Chu was singing at the top of his lungs. Just as the earth spirit was about to complain about his nondescript singing style, his stomach suddenly rumbled, and then he felt a sharp pain. He looked at the pastries with a pale face, and then rushed to the toilet. Father, what did you do this time? Chu Qingyan looked at the figure leaving in the wind and couldn't help but click her tongue. Chu Qingyan's father said proudly, I sprinkled a packet of croton powder on the pastries. Chu Qingyan's eyes twitched. That, Turan, you're on your own. Chu Qingyan's father smiled sinisterly. Little fellow, would I be so stupid to do something to the tea again? How stupid. In fact, in the King of England's residence, Turan wasn't the only one who wanted to cry. Even Mu Ling was the same. Mu Ling, who was far away by the Huailiu River, received a letter from the capital. Although he was confused about his master's intentions, he still rushed back without stopping. Originally, he thought that something big had happened. After running for 3 days and 3 nights, he was tired. As soon as he returned to the Fu, he didn't even have time to change his clothes before he went to see his master to ask what was so important this time. But he didn't know that his master's task was to make a few fun toys for the little princess consort. He rushed back from so far away just for this. Oh, my lord! Mu Ling was instantly filled with blood. Thus, on this day, Mu Ling sat on the steps, holding a knife in one hand and a piece of wood in the other. Chu Qingyan's father, who had successfully teased Turan again, came over. You're cutting wood? Mu Ling raised his head and looked at him. He didn't know him and had never seen him before. Thus, he lowered his head and continued to cut. Wow, you're amazing. This flower seems to be real. Mu Ling looked at the failed wooden flower and casually threw it away. What a waste. Chu Qingyan's father picked it up and gestured with it. Then, he stuck it on Mu Ling's head. Mu Ling's mouth twitched. When he was designing something, he hated it when people chattered at the side. Moreover, this person even tampered with it. If it wasn't for the fact that he was in a hurry to design toys for the little princess consort, he wouldn't have let this person off. Mu Ling pulled out the wooden flower from his head and turned to leave. He didn't know where this person came from. He couldn't afford to offend him, so why couldn't he avoid him? But, you're really amazing. By the way, other than carving flowers, do you know anything else? Indifference. Is it that you only know how to carve flowers? Indifference. Indifference. Why aren't you saying anything? Are you mute? Indifference. No. He couldn't take it anymore. So you can talk. Then other than carving flowers, do you know anything else? Indifference. Indifference again. So you only know how to carve flowers. Don't be shy and deny it. Indifference. No. He couldn't take it anymore. It's like this. Then other than carving flowers, do you know anything else? Indifference. He couldn't take it anymore. Where did this chattering person come from? Mu Ling couldn't hold back his anger. He swung the dagger in his hand at the large rock beside him and the rock instantly shattered into pieces. He thought that the person beside him would be afraid and wouldn't bother him anymore. Wow, so you also know how to cut rocks. Then do you know how to carve animals? Indifference stared at him with starry eyes. Mu Ling was discouraged. I do. Tiger, little black, little white, do you also know how to carve flowers? Indifference stared at him with starry eyes. I do. Dispirited. Hualing, who was hanging upside down on the tree, poked the person beside him. It seems like Master Chu has already changed his target. We won't be the first ones to bear the brunt. Turin closed his eyes and had a dejected expression. Don't talk to him. After squatting in the toilet for an entire day, he didn't have any strength. Chapter 117. Xiao Su was aware of what Chu Feng's father had done in the past few days, but he had never had the time to deal with these matters. Therefore, when the Earth Spirit, Wood Spirit, and Fire Spirit wandered around in front of him in an attempt to arouse his pity, he chose to turn a blind eye. He also felt that his confidants were too idle. It was correct to find something for them to do. In just a few short days, Chu Qingyan had advanced by leaps and bounds through Turin's training. She walked with a sandbag tied to her, ate, and then took off the sandbag to practice Qinggong. Her body was as light as a swallow. On this day, Chu Qingyan stepped on the tree trunk and ran up step by step. She ran all the way to the top of the tree branch and tapped her feet on the thick branch. Smiling slightly, she turned around and flew down from the top of the tree. Her clothes fluttered as if she was a little immortal that had come down from the ninth heaven, naughty, strange, and clever. When she landed, she ran in front of the stone table and giggled at Xiao Su, who was testing her results in the past few days. How is it? How is it? Full marks? Barely. Xiao Su drank a mouthful of tea. He did not want to encourage her arrogance and faintly replied. Chu Qingyan pursed her lips. It really wasn't easy to hear a word of praise from the big ice block's mouth. Little Princess Fei's progress is very fast. You really are talented. Hualing, who was standing on the side, praised with a smile. Turin glanced at him. What a glib tongue. But it had to be said that Chu Qingyan's progress and hard work really made him look at her in a new light. Chu Qingyan smiled at the two of them and then spoke to Xiao Su. She flew up a tree and flew up and down in the Wangfu. In the past, she had always envied birds that could fly freely. Now she could do it. Something she didn't even dare to think about before had become a reality. As expected, she had to have a dream. What if she saw a ghost? Xiao Su looked at Chu Qingyan, who was as happy as a bird, and a trace of a smile appeared in his eyes. After all, he was one of his men, and his strength was not weak. Hualing and Turin could feel their master's mood. The two of them looked at each other and then looked at Chu Qingyan flying in the sky. They couldn't help but complain at the same time. They clearly felt that the little princess was improving quickly, but they weren't willing to praise her. Their master was truly too arrogant. Wait, why would the word tsundere appear in their minds? Could it be that the poison of Chu Li's tea was too deep? After a day of training, Chu Qingyan changed out of the small-size clothes that Big Ice Cube specially asked Hong Yi to prepare for her. The comfortable material made her whole body look neat and strong. Then, she changed into the clothes that Big Ice Cube wore when he was young. Suddenly, she changed from a slender and elegant girl to a handsome young master. She ran to the study to report to Big Ice Cube and then prepared to go out to play. This was something that Big Ice Cube had promised her. If she passed the test, she could go out and play with the lanterns. Xiao Su put down the document in his hand and looked at Chu Qingyan, who was wearing the clothes he wore when he was young. He was suddenly stunned. It was like he was seeing himself from many years ago, still full of vitality and hope for life. But the fires suddenly spread in front of him and that him was drowned in a sea of fire. Chu Qingyan could feel that Jiang Yi was in a daze. There was a darkness in his eyes that she could not understand. She felt an inexplicable tug at her heart as she stepped forward and tugged at his sleeve. Will you accompany me to play? Xiao Su came back to his senses and lowered his head to pat her head. No, bring the guards. Be careful and don't cause trouble. Did she look like someone that would cause trouble? Big Ice Cube, you're becoming more and more naggy. Chu Qingyan pursed her lips and teased him. Xiao Su took back his hand and looked at her. It seems like it's best if you don't go out. Cool, I didn't say anything just now. I'll go early and come back early. Chu Qingyan revealed a grin as she promised with a smile. Go. Xiao Su rubbed his forehead. This girl was becoming more and more mischievous. Chu Qingyan saw that the darkness in his eyes had disappeared and relaxed. She waved her hand at him and then brought Xining out of the palace. When they passed by the entrance of a yard, they heard Huoling and Turan talking. That brat from the Fu family, I've had people keep an eye on him for a few days and he finally came out today. Water Spirit said that everything has been prepared. Turan, do you want to come and watch a good show? Huoling rubbed his fists as he asked in an excited voice. Turan rolled his eyes at him, boring. To teach someone a lesson, was there a need for him, the leader of the hidden guards, to come out? What a joke. Huoling wanted to complain that he was too boring staying in the palace when he wasn't out on a mission, but there was suddenly an untimely voice that came from the side. Bring me with you. Huoling's neck stiffened as he turned his head. He saw that little ancestor with his hands behind his back looking very excited as he looked at him. Thus, in the dark night, two figures, one big and one small, appeared on the most bustling and lively street in the capital at night. The fragrant pavilion was like a celestial pavilion, the fragrance was like a celestial mist. Orioles and swallows, red and green, floating in the middle of the wine shop, moving in front of everyone's eyes. Huoling looked at the woman in revealing clothes greeting guests. This was the 32nd time he regretted agreeing to the little princess to bring her out to watch a show. The little princess who had never seen the world would be scared away if she saw this. How would he explain this to Lord later? Not bad, cherry blossoms, willow wastes, it really is the most bustling one-night romantic place in the capital. Huoling, what are you just standing there for? Aren't you going to watch a good show? Let's go. Huoling's eyes opened wide as he looked at the little princess who was fanning herself with excitement in her eyes. He suddenly wanted to poke his eyes out. This little beauty was not the little princess he knew. It definitely wasn't. Chu Qingyan ignored Huoling who was trying to hypnotize himself and slowly walked towards the largest brothel in the capital. A night of drinking. When the brothel keeper who was greeting guests saw Chu Qingyan who was dressed like a piece of jade, she thought she was a child who came to cause trouble. She was about to wave her hand to chase her away, but when her eyes saw the high-quality clothes that she was wearing, her expression changed. Little brother, you're really handsome. This is your first time coming out to play, right? What kind of girl do you want? She's fat and thin, with heavy makeup, she has everything you need. The people who walked around the brothel did not have any strong points other than a pair of sharp eyes. From her clothes, it could be seen that this person was rich and noble. In their eyes, she was a piece of fat meat. Who cared if she was young or not, the rich were the masters. This little master likes to hear these words. Huozi, give this little master a reward. Chu Qingyan gently fanned her lips and curled her lips into a smile. Under the illumination of the lanterns, she looked very beautiful. The brothel keeper wanted to give a sigh. What a handsome little gentleman. A shining silver coin fell into her arms and the brothel keeper quickly caught it. Then she looked up to see the fierce Huoling and was instantly frightened. She wanted to kill this little gentleman, but seeing that this guard of hers was not to be trifled with. Huoling was a bit depressed at this time. When did he become Huozi? However, seeing that the little princess was interested in this brothel and was swaggering in with the brothel keeper, he could only accept his fate. At worst, he would be punished by the Lord when he went back. He only hoped that the little princess would not cause any trouble here. At the end of the road, a purple-clothed youth curled his lips into an evil smile. It seemed like he had seen the little girl. Looking up, a night of drinking. She really was bold. Chapter 118. Chu Qingyan waved her paper fan as she swaggered into drunk for a night. When the girls who were greeting the guests saw such a handsome young man, it was like a pack of wolves seeing a little white rabbit as they all rushed forward. After staying in this kind of place for a long time, what kind of people had they not seen before? However, this young master in front of them was clearly a rich family's young master who came out to see the world. He was a living little rich man who was easy to serve and easy to take advantage of, so no one was willing to let go of this good opportunity. This little master, this is your first time here, right? Let Furong greet you. Yan Ji is also very gentle, this little master should come with this servant. Ying knows how to sing, I guarantee you will be satisfied. Instantly, Chu Qingyan was surrounded by girls. Hualing unconsciously wanted to save her, but he was stunned by the scene in front of him. Come, 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 raise your heads for this little master to see. Chu Qingyan closed her fan and her eyes passed over the girls with a smile. The girls raised their chins and scratched their heads. Chu Qingyan had a smile like a patron who had been in the flower garden for a long time. She gave an old evaluation, not bad, not bad. Flower fragrance and jade skin, smooth and soft. Your lips are a bit red and your waists are slender. These girls really are peerless beauties. The girls were openly teased by her and their faces all turned red. They pushed her shoulder and angrily said, Sir, you really are annoying. Hualing's chin was stunned. Was this still their family's innocent and toothless little princess? She was just like a little sex fiend. Should he knock her out and secretly take her away? Otherwise, he could already imagine what kind of punishment he would face when he returned. But the moment Hualing hesitated, he already lost a good opportunity. Chu Qingyan turned her head with 2 red lipstick marks on her face. She smiled like a little cat as she said to him, Huazi, choose a room. Only then did Hualing come back to his senses. He told the brothel keeper to bring them to a side room. Chu Qingyan then waved the girls away and said to the brothel keeper, bring us to a side room first. Prepare some good wine and dishes. The brothel keeper had long been shocked by Chu Qingyan's way of flirting with the ladies. It seemed like she had misjudged Chu Qingyan. Although Chu Qingyan was young, she was already familiar with the brothels. She quickly said, then, can you prepare a few good-looking ladies for me? It would be even better if I could play the zither and sing some songs. Chu Qingyan covered her mouth with her folding fan, revealing a faint smile. That's for sure. The girls I have here are all the best in the capital. They're well versed in zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. I guarantee you'll be satisfied. The brothel keeper immediately responded. All right, Huazi, reward him. Chu Qingyan was extremely generous. The procuress took a golden leaf from Hualing who had already lost his ability to think. After biting it and confirming that it was real, she immediately had someone lead her upstairs. Chu Qingyan slowly followed the servant up the stairs. She saw Hualing who was still in a daze from the corner of her eyes and revealed a sly smile with her folding fan. The reason she was so familiar with it was because when she was in university, she was often tricked by her roommates who were in charge of the school's student art troupe to perform in skits. She had played the role of a playboy in her second year, so she was already very familiar with those words. She just treated it as a big stage and performed it with ease. After entering the room, Chu Qingyan revealed her true self. She grabbed Hualing and asked, "Where's Fu Enlai? Where is he?" Hualing's eyes avoided the 2 bright red lipstick marks on her face. He pointed at the side room with difficulty, "He's not here yet, but he should be here soon." At this time, there was a knock on the window and a black-clothed person came in. "Sir Hualing, the person has been brought here. He'll wake up in a quarter of an hour." The black-clothed person reported with a bow. Did anyone notice? Hualing stood up straight and gently coughed as he smoothed out the wrinkled sleeve that the little princess had grabbed. He returned to his normal serious appearance in front of his subordinates. That person was knocked out in the alley by my subordinates and was brought here. No one was alerted. The black-clothed person said. Huo Ling nodded. What should we do with the girl that was caught by Fu and Lai? The black-clothed person continued to ask. Let her out of the city and give her some silver to not come back to the capital. Huo Ling said without any hesitation. Yes. The black-clothed person immediately went out the window. On the way here, Chu Qingyan already knew how they were going to severely punish Fu and Lai. For some reason, Fu Anlai had been staying in his residence obediently for the past few days. He didn't come out to seek pleasure or harm the flowers and plants. Today, he finally couldn't hold it in any longer and sent someone to kidnap the daughter of a minister surnamed Wu, whom he had been coveting for a long time, to one night drunk to satisfy his desires. When the time came, he would send the withered Miss Wu back and send someone to propose marriage, using the excuse of taking her in as a concubine. A woman's chastity was important, and the other party had such a great background. Even if he had sent someone to propose marriage before, she wouldn't dare to not marry him now. Then again, citizens did not fight with officials because they couldn't win. Fu and Lai was like this. It wasn't that he couldn't force the other side to marry, but he felt that the other side's refusal would hurt his face. So, he wanted to make that Wu family suffer the consequences of offending him. That was why he made this move today. Huo Ling and the others also used this move to beat him at his own game, setting up a series of traps. Other than using this chance to punish Fu and Lai, there was another reason. However, Huo Ling felt that the little princess was inexperienced and didn't need to explain too much to her. Yo, not bad, you have quite the style. Chu Qingyan clicked her tongue as she spoke to Huo Ling, looking at him just now. If she didn't see it with her own eyes, she really would not have believed that the dignified person just now was the silly Huo Ling. Huo Ling's eyes twitched. Wasn't he always like this? But ever since she and her father entered the King of England's palace, he could not find his calm and confident self from the past. Little young master is too kind. Chu Qingyan automatically ignored Huo Ling's modesty. She waved her fan and curiously asked, are the black-clothed people that always follow Big Ice Cube and the black-clothed people just now all secret guards? You can say that, but the secret guards are only a part of the fierce valiant cavalry. Outside, to prevent the walls from having ears, Huo Ling said in a low voice. Chu Qingyan also knew that the outside world couldn't compare to the king's palace, so she stopped her curiosity. She felt that the fierce valiant cavalry was Big Ice Cube's most trusted backup, so it was better if she knew less about it. After all, the more she knew, the sooner she would die. After estimating the time, Chu Qingyan stood up and placed her fan on her belt. She jumped out the window and turned around to say, hurry up, I said I was going to watch a play. When her words fell, she disappeared from the window. Huo Ling wanted to stop her, but it was too late. He could only immediately follow, otherwise he wouldn't be able to handle the trouble this little ancestor caused. In the opposite room, there was an unlatched window facing Chu Qingyan's room. The person inside the window was leaning against the frame with a smile as she said to the person behind her, did you find out the identity of that little girl? Chapter 119. Young master, this subordinate found that this girl came from the King of England's palace, but this subordinate could not find her identity. The subordinate, Xian Shizimo, lowered his head and replied. You couldn't find her? Higashio Motetsu raised an eyebrow. Yes, there seems to be a mysterious power that is obstructing this subordinate's investigation. This subordinate is very ashamed of not being able to complete the mission. No matter what, their Moon Palace's intelligence team was one of the best in the world. How could they fail at the start? But this was the truth. Higashio Motetsu casually plucked a leaf from the windowsill and his eyes revealed an indescribable charm. Xiao Su has a group of mysterious fierce cavalry. Usually, other than the cavalry masters appearing by his side, the others are hidden in the shadows. These people all have their own strengths, so you don't need to pay attention to them. Don't let them find your whereabouts in the next few days and drag you out of Moon Palace. As for that little girl's identity, you don't need to investigate anymore. I'm afraid I already know. Xian Shizimo was a bit surprised, but he still withdrew. Even though that night was very dark and he didn't really care who he was holding hostage, he felt a strong sense of familiarity. After failing to investigate the King of England's palace a few days ago, he didn't make a move. Now that he saw that little girl delivering herself to him, he couldn't miss this opportunity. At this time, Chu Qingyan, who was being targeted, had already jumped onto the beam of the room next door. Huo Ling, who was following closely behind, was squatting next to her. I didn't think that the first time I used Qinggong after learning it was to be a gentleman on the beam. Chu Qingyan said with a sigh. Huo Ling's lips twitched. The little princess consort was doing this knowingly, alright? Also, gentleman on the beam. Did she know how to use idioms? At least use an idiom that matched his identity, alright? Chu Qingyan didn't notice Huo Ling's silent criticism. Her gaze was immediately attracted by a sack on the bed. She asked in a low voice, "You still haven't told me, who is the person on the bed?" She had only come to watch the show and had forgotten to ask. Huo Ling looked at the sack and said ambiguously, "The new martial scholar, Hua Mo Nu. Champion of martial arts." Chu Qingyan could not help but shed tears of sympathy for Fu Anlai. However, she was still rejoicing in his misfortune. Shoo! Huo Ling suddenly put his hand to his lips, indicating for her not to make a sound. While Chu Qingyan was puzzled, the sound of footsteps came from outside the door. It was a bit heavy, but it was also a bit urgent. Chu Qingyan couldn't help looking at Huo Ling with a look of admiration. Being able to distinguish sounds with just his hearing was simply too amazing. Huo Ling received his little princess consort's gaze. Although he pretended not to care on the surface, his tail was already wagging in his heart. The door of the private room was pushed open from the outside. Before the person could be seen, a flattering voice could be heard. "Young master, I've brought her over. You can rest assured and enjoy her. Brat, you've done well. Take this, I'll give you some money to call a few ladies to serve you well." Fu Anlai said with satisfaction. "Thank you, young master." The manservant took the money and left with his men. As soon as Fu Anlai stepped into the room, he immediately closed the door with an impatient look. He rubbed his hands together and licked his lips as he said, "Where is the little miss? Did you become impatient from waiting?" He walked in front of the bed and saw a large bulge in the sack. He was a bit surprised at first glance, it seemed to have gotten bigger. Could it be that in just a few days, the Wu family's little miss had become fat? But Fu Anlai did not think too much about it. He quickly took off all his clothes, leaving only a pair of underwear. Seeing this, Huo Ling had the thought of jumping down and beating the person below. No, before that, he had to beat himself up first. He should never have agreed to the little princess and then seen such an unsightly scene. My God, would master know about this matter? But when he turned around, he saw the little princess disdainfully commenting on Fu Anlai's figure. A belly full of evil tricks, a body full of fat, a swimming ring that can squeeze several flies to death, a face full of oil, a fat head with big ears, and a lustful heart. It seems that he has already entered the stage of seeking death. I suddenly thought of a phrase that is especially suitable for him. What phrase? He is curious. Zhu Ba Jia looks in the mirror and is not human. Huo Ling turned his gaze to the person below, expressing his agreement and sympathy at the same time. His little princess had already turned on her poisonous tongue. Looking like this, he still dares to come out and scare people. I have to say that his courage is commendable. She hated people who bullied men and tyrannized women the most. This Fu Anlai had already stepped on her bottom line. The commendable Fu Anlai's body full of belly meat was exposed to the air, but he had never disliked his figure. He even boasted that his appearance was comparable to Pan An's, comparable to Wei Jie's, and often thought that he was the capital's #1 handsome man. Fu Anlai threw the clothes in his hands to the side and then impatiently climbed onto the bed. He drooled as he imagined the Wu family's little Miss's graceful figure. His eyes were shining. "Little Miss, I'm coming." Fu Anlai began to untie the rope on the burlap sack. At this time, Huo Ling, who was on the roof beam, saw this. He flipped a stone in his hand and threw it at the burlap sack, hitting the person's acupuncture point. Fu Anlai, who was fighting with the rope, didn't notice this at all. However, Chu Qingyan and Huo Ling could clearly feel the burlap sack moving. The two people looked at each other. Hua Mo had woken up. "Don't be afraid. Let this young master properly dote on you." As soon as his voice fell, the burlap sack opened. Fu Anlai was about to move over, but what welcomed him was a solid fist. "Io!" Fu Anlai screamed as he covered his eyes. Immediately after, the burlap sack moved. His entire body was suddenly swept off the bed by a whirlwind kick. This time, Fu Anlai covered his butt and screamed again and again. At this time, a tall and sturdy handsome man came out of the burlap sack. His eyes were filled with anger as he placed his hands on the burlap sack. With a bit of force, the burlap sack was torn to pieces. "Actually daring to have ideas about me, seeking death." Fu Anlai, who still hadn't recovered from this sudden change, was still in shock as he watched the charming little miss in front of him turn into a fierce man. He immediately flew into a rage out of shame. "Who are you? Why did you run onto my bed? Do you know who this young master is?" "I don't know who you are, but my fist is telling me that it wants to turn you into a pulp." Hua Mo stood up. She was a full 9 feet tall. Fu Anlai saw that the situation wasn't good. He immediately grabbed his clothes and wanted to run out the door, but Hua Mo was faster than him. With a kick, Fu Anlai's fat body was knocked out of the door. His naked appearance was exposed in front of everyone. Hua Mo followed closely behind. Fu Anlai no longer cared about the fact that he wasn't wearing any clothes as he rolled down the stairs. He wanted to find reinforcements, causing countless people to scream along the way. Chu Qingyan clenched her fists and encouraged him, "Run, little fat pig." Huo Ling looked at the incomparably excited little Princess Consort and felt a bit helpless. He then said, "Little Princess Consort, this subordinate will go and take a look. You should return to the private room first. Don't wander around." Chu Qingyan waved her hand at him before Huo Ling left. "Torturing scum is the most satisfying," Chu Qingyan said to herself. Just as she prepared to return to the private room, she suddenly felt that something was wrong with the air around her. There was a familiar scent of flowers. Her neck stiffened as she turned her head. She saw an evildoer squatting on the roof, waving his claws at her. What a coincidence! Chapter 120. What a coincidence! The corner of Chu Qingyan's mouth twitched. Who would run over to this beam for no reason? Then there was only one explanation. This person had been watching from the side for a long time. Even Huo Ling did not notice him, which meant that this person's martial arts were above Huo Ling's. Her hands subtly curled into a fist. Higashio Motetsu lazily leaned against the wooden beam behind him with a smile in his eyes. What? Are you surprised to see me? Could it be that you can't recognize me after not seeing me for a long time? Chu Qingyan ridiculed in her heart. How could someone with such a devilish appearance forget him with a single glance? But she giggled in response, young master is so outstanding and elegant that it makes people forget everything. How could I not recognize you? That's right, the air here is not bad, but I've already finished enjoying it. You can slowly enjoy it, I won't disturb you any longer. After saying this, she flew out the window with a whoosh. Seeing that snow-white figure jump out, Higashio Motetsu gently tapped the beat, 3, 2, 1. Then his narrowed eyes opened and he flew out. After flying far away, Chu Qingyan stood on a roof and lightly panted. This person shouldn't be so bored as to chase after her, right? Reality proved that this person was indeed very bored. Because when she turned around, a tall and slender person had already tilted his head and waved his claws at her. "We meet again." Chu Qingyan slowly turned her head back and silently chanted in her heart. She didn't see anything, she didn't see anything. Then she circulated her chi and desperately tried to move forward. Again. Higashio Motetsu slowly straightened his body. After losing 3 more times, he slowly chased after her. Chu Qingyan was exhausted from running, but that person was like a ghost that wouldn't leave her. What was even more infuriating was that her legs were about to break, but he was still calm and composed like he was taking a stroll. Chu Qingyan finally gave up and landed on a tree. She turned her head and panted, "I'm not playing anymore. I'm not playing with you anymore." Higashio Motetsu laughed, "I let you go so many times, but you still didn't run away. Should I say that your qinggong is not good enough or not good enough?" Chu Qingyan rolled her eyes at him and didn't want to answer him. Higashio Motetsu saw that the little fellow was ignoring him and couldn't help but laugh. "You've learned qinggong in such a short time, your aptitude isn't bad. Do you want to be my disciple? I can teach you something else." Chu Qingyan suddenly became alert as she took a step back. She stared at the person who was leaning against the tree trunk casually. Pursing her lips, she asked, "Who are you? Why do you keep following me? What is your goal?" Of so many questions. Dongting Wangyu raised her eyebrows, only to see her rolling her bell-sized eyes. She smiled and said, "Why are you in such a hurry? Be patient. I'll answer your questions one by one. First question, I'm not anyone. I'm Higashio Motetsu, Rizhao Dongting, Jadeite Wangyu." A gust of wind blew, lifting his black hair that fell on his shoulders and dancing in the air. His long and narrow phoenix eyes slightly narrowed, his thick and slender eyelashes inadvertently flickered with a seductive charm. That charm was different from a woman's coquettish charm, but it was romantic and elegant that made people unable to look away. Higashio Motetsu, it had to be said that it was a good name. Second question, the road is open to the sky. If you can walk on it, why can't I? How can I follow you? Higashio Motetsu said with a trace of rascality, making Chu Qingyan itch with hatred. Alright, last question. Higashio Motetsu suddenly became serious as a strange brother who kidnapped a child. "I don't have any goal. It's just that you seem to have a good affinity with this young master, so how about we be friends?" Chu Qingyan blinked, the person in front of her also blinked. She shouldn't have misheard, right? Why did the style suddenly change? Be friends? With me? She pointed at herself in disbelief. Higashio Motetsu blinked, yes. Chu Qingyan scratched her head, unable to digest this fact. Why? No reason, it's just a good affinity. If I have to give a reason, you look a lot like this young master's next friend. Higashio Motetsu teased her with interest. Chu Qingyan rolled her eyes at him. Look like my next friend? She wanted to say that he looked like this young lady's next boyfriend. Alright, as long as you're happy. Chu Qingyan did not want to bother with him anymore. She could tell that this person was bored out of his mind, and that was why he was playing a game of cat and mouse with her. Since she could not sense any ill intentions from him, she decided to let him be. At this time, there was a commotion in front of them. From afar, they could see that the officials had gone to get drunk. Chu Qingyan was attracted by the commotion over there. Higashio Motetsu looked at the cross-dressing Chu Qingyan in front of him and slightly hooked his lips. The little girl who wasn't afraid in the face of danger that night and the little boy who wasn't afraid in the face of danger on the tree had already overlapped with the mischievous her in front of him. Higashio Motetsu was already certain of her identity. At this time, he followed her gaze and fell into deep thought. Teasing Fu Anlai was only one part of this chain of plans, but the most important part was Huaimo. In the past few years, Sichuan's neighboring countries had been crossing the border to cause trouble. In addition, the bandits at the border were becoming more and more serious. In the future, they would definitely need generals to lead troops. The Fu family were civil officials, so they had literati under their command. Empress Liang's maternal family, the Liang family, were all military generals. Thus, the Fu family didn't want the Sichuan emperor to put people from the Liang family in important positions. They had always needed generals who could lead troops into battle, so roping in some promising new officials was a top priority. Huaimo was a newly promoted martial scholar, and his grandfather had been a founding general of Sichuan. It was said that he was well versed in the art of war and was both brave and resourceful. Thus, Huaimo, this newly promoted official, became a fragrant cake in the imperial court. Everyone wanted to rope him into their camp. At the very least, they couldn't let their opponents obtain him. It was safest to put him under their own banner. Thus, this time, the Fu family's legitimate son had been beaten up by Huaimo. The Fu family would definitely hold a grudge against Huaimo, but Huaimo was an upright person. The Fu family's legitimate son had bad intentions and offended him, so the Fu family definitely wouldn't rope him in. Thus, it was impossible for both sides to get along well. Higashio Motetsu couldn't help but admit that this move was extremely clever. Xiao Su's subordinates were all capable people. Although it was only a small matter, it played a decisive role. The Fu family had already lost a great general. These things weren't within the scope of his concern, but he was certain that Xiao Su would never take the initiative to make a move. This time, he had suppressed the Fu family for the sake of this little fellow. It was obvious that this little fellow was his weak spot. If that was really the case, then it would be easy to deal with him. When Chu Qingyan turned around, she saw Higashio Motetsu looking at her with a smile that wasn't a smile. He looked like a cunning fox. Alarm bells immediately went off in her head. What are you looking at me for? You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.